3, 2, 1.
Got it.
Yeah. I might record it today.
Oh,
Yeah,
we're
I think it's a
starting
good
already?
idea. We do. We get it. We have a schedule and we try to remain consistent.
The lady's
with
voice
scheduling.
says recording is in progress.
Mm-hmm.
In
I'm
English?
supposed to sing. You guys
In
ready?
English?
Wednesday.
Okay.
Wednesday.
3, 2, 1. Everybody
May the
sing.
4th.
I don't
Welcome
remember
to the
Jim's address for
FlowState.
his P.O. box today. I don't remember Jim's address for the P.O. box today.
I'm looking to find the
That's not a song.
I
FlowState.
don't remember Jim's address for the P.O. box
Can I
today.
borrow
For the
your
P.O. box.
FlowState just for the night? I'll give it back to
Damn
you
it, Sean!
before the
You're overriding.
sunlight in the morning.
Right. It'll help them to remember if they have to work at it. Scratch at the ground, little chickens to get the bugs.
Speaking of bugs, I've got a lot of friends
Hey, you dogs.
who have
Oh
been
my God.
finding warm
Nice
places,
goal.
crawling into crevices.
No.
You ask, well, could an exterminator help with that? I am the exterminator, but I've decided to use a vacuum cleaner as it is the least toxic option for all of us.
And horns on it.
Oh, man. Yes.
Oh, man. That's
Beautiful.
beautiful. Gorgeous skull. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I glued all these little in to make sure they don't fall out on anybody.
Nice.
The teeth have been secured.
Great shape.
Teeth
Mm.
secure.
Nice grill.
I
Right?
like that sentence. It's a good sentence. The teeth have been secured.
I have a tooth on my purse. It's really cute. Everybody
Pretty
knows.
good sentence too. And to me, that
One
other sentence
tooth
makes
is
me
on the
think of like
loose. It's on the purse.
makes
Called
me
a
think of
purse
like
tooth.
a code that you use when you're robbing the bank. You know, the teeth have been secured.
Mm.
Yeah, teeth.
Yeah, okay, so we got a live link. I suppose we could find that and share that as well to
Check this
people.
out.
Is a live link. I'm gonna turn off my notification sounds. Not disturb.
Bright-eyed does available to butter bread from a far distance.
What?
Butter by distance.
Butter my distance.
Butter from a distance.
Butter from a distance.
And better for it.
better butter, baby.
Butter by distance. That makes me think like spooky action at a distance. Is that like buttering toast in
Oh.
one continent and it automatically is buttered at the same
Correct.
time on
It's
another
like
continent?
you butter one side of a toasted piece of rye bread and it slips out of your hand and it falls from your hand and it lands in a different land. It's no longer at your feet, it's at someone else's feet and they
Yeah.
pick it up because the butter side fell up, not down, because it falls down. Then it stays on the ground and the 5-second rule doesn't apply if the butter
Why
is
not?
between the ground and the bread.
Why not? Well, just eat one piece and you'll see.
Well, you'll
If
grit
you-
your teeth with the soil and the dirt and the grime on the butter, which is not
I mean,
how we secure our teeth.
It depends on how much butter and how toasty your bread is. Now, if you've lightly buttered the bread and you've really toasted it severely, there is a chance that you could swipe it off the ground in less than 5 seconds and take a very, very careful angled look, preferably with some kind of light, preferably with sunlight. But you hold the thing up really close to your face at a nice, sharp, perfect angle, and you look really carefully, and you see if there's any fragments of things that are much bigger than the size of a dog's tiny hair, or you know, anything. You know, you look for granular surface area of things that look like sand. If you don't see any of that stuff that really bothers you, according to your preference, you can still eat it. I mean, I've done it. I've fixed toast.
Are you guys
across
trying to
ground and
summon
eaten it
Gordy?
before.
I feel like that this conversation should be rehashed when Gordy's around. We are talking about butter.
No,
Oh,
now we're
I-
talking about hash browns.
I think
Sprouts?
Put 'em
Oh,
in a
I
grill.
learned from Mario tonight that hashtag is also called an octothorpe.
yeah,
Hashtag
yeah.
hash browns, octothorpe.
Hashtag Octothorpe.
Yeah, I caught the
And
end of
hello,
that as usual,
everybody.
and it was
Also,
great.
hi. Good to see you all.
Hey, Chance.
Good to
Hey,
see
Chance.
Hey, cups.
Every time I think of your name, Chance, what I imagine is that I'm wandering along, and all of a sudden there's a garden that I wasn't expecting, and it's a chance garden.
Hey.
Get out.
you. I imagine it to be a food forest of
Yeah, well, you know, like
plenty.
you go around a wall in the city and you expect it to be like a shitty, ratty area. Instead, it's a chance
Mhm.
garden.
Chance garden.
You ever find cilantro growing between the cracks of the sidewalk and you're like, it must be my
That's
Taco
right.
Tuesday.
That's making me want to plant it, though. That's a great idea to plant herbs in the sidewalk.
Mhm.
Greetings,
Yeah.
spiders.
Greetings, dissident.
Greetings.
We were
Sounds
talking
like my
about the
Archon.
slickness of the butter on the bread, and maybe the solution is to add extra butter on the bread in case it falls from your hand onto the ground, and when you pick it up, there'll be some on the ground and some will remain on the bread. And there'll be a clean
Well, we were
separation
also-
between the two.
I do like the theory. I don't remember what the specific nomenclature was, but the idea that if you drop the bread and it lands face up, butter face up, that the bread could dematerialize and land in a different place.
That is correct. The
Butter
veil
transfer?
between
Was
worlds
it-
has never been more thin.
It's called the butter transfer agreement. Is that right?
Something to
The
that
butter
effect.
transfer. I like that.
The materialization of a meal. Maybe this is a more efficient way to deliver food to people.
Well, I like it better than these food delivery services already.
DoorDash.
The names are so bad. What's the other one?
I
Oh,
feel like they're
Uber
gonna,
Eats.
yeah, they're
Uber
gonna run
Eats.
up to my house. They're gonna drop the food, and they're gonna run away.
That's what they do.
They
Haven't you
did
ever
that
used
to
it?
me. I was getting pizza wrapped in garbage bags, left on my doorstep, and people were running
That's
away.
what they do.
I don't know how any delivery driver was able to accept any cash tips when they were so they were in such a mood just to dine and like get to your ding dong ditch here with a pizza.
That's
And
what
if
they do.
if they even knock on the door loud enough for you to hear it.
Have you
have
ever
to
had them
have
get
the
it
app.
wrong?
Well,
If they
if
get it wrong, they just refund you the money and then they won't even talk to you.
well, you could open it up and say, yeah, I wanted black olives. There's no black olives on this pizza. Dine and dash me again with the correct order. And then have to be like, well, keep that pizza. We'll have to correct it. I don't know if that's why Pizza Huts were closing, because they were having to redo orders because the person wouldn't stick around long enough for you to open the pizza pie to see that it's exactly what you ordered. But that's sort of the
Oh, you're reminding me of the good old
days.
days of delivering pizzas. Of one time I had something terrible, embarrassing happen. I delivered a pizza to a fireman in the Walla Valley. And someone had made him a very thoughtless mistake. You could take pizzas that were wrong orders or that were made on accident, and you could stash them in the back and eat them at lunch break or whatever.
Mhm.
And then you could take the remainder of that pizza with you at the end of your shift. And someone had foolishly put this in a place where it could accidentally be loaded into a fresh order bag. And back in the day, Pizza Hut, the policy was you bring the pizza to the door and you open the box and you demonstrate to them that it is definitely the exact thing that they ordered and that it looks nice and good. You know, that was how we were trained. And I did all of my pizza delivering according exactly to my training because that's how you made the most money. You were supposed to have hot peppers and Parmesan and napkins and silverware, and you were supposed to, of course, be kind, courteous, and polite, and show them their food and make sure that they were happy with it. And then, there was also techniques for how to count change back to get the biggest tip. But as you can imagine, opening the box and having it being half-eaten pieces of someone else's leftover pizza for a fireman who'd already been waiting because his order was late was
Mhm.
highly caustic and embarrassing. And then he says, "Is Victor still running that place?" So he knows my manager personally, and I was just like, "Oh my god!" So
Oh.
yeah, that was really that freaked me out. I haven't thought about that for a long time.
Has
Got it.
anyone here
Got it.
ever been a sandwich artist?
No, thank God, no.
Okay. All right.
I make my sandwiches with love.
Right, because this could have quickly become a sandwich artist support group, a former sandwich artist recovery group.
I was a pizza delivery guy, and the occasional fun thing that would happen was people would invite you in for a bong rib. But I've
Oh.
also been a sandwich maker. I don't know if it was an artist. I was more of a wrap master. I was really good at making wraps and spuds.
Okay. I feel like you were going to say something to the effect of a lot of people didn't have any cash to flash as a tip, so they flash something else as well. And maybe
That has
was
happened in my
Okay.
delivery experience as well. Yes.
right. And is there a protocol?
I was also going to make a
say,
pun
like-
about
like,
being making
look
wraps.
away?
I was Chance the Rapper.
Yeah, that's great. I thought of that immediately, and I bit my tongue because it's like, Sean, just don't be so corny all the time. Just be quiet sometimes.
Does somebody
Yeah.
have Martin's invite info?
Oh, yeah, I took down his email address, and then I never sent him a
I
message.
have summoned
So-
him. He has been summoned.
Okay.
Yeah.
The link is public on the
you.
Telegram, so anyone listening can find the link on the Telegram and join right in.
Yeah, just don't drop any N-bombs, please. That's all we ask.
Just yeah, that's okay. I've got some buttered buns in the oven, and I will be right back with I hope.
Buttery.
Yeah, this is, I don't know. Gordy said he wasn't going to come because he had other stuff going on, but if we keep talking about butter, he might have a weird feeling hanging out at his house, like something's supposed to be happening. I'm
I have a
supposed to be
special
involved.
buttery surprise today. Mostly for me, but I'm gonna be making butter.
Oh, cool. Goat butter?
No. Unfortunately I don't have goat milk yet, but I have about a gallon of heavy cream and a mixer, an industrial egg beater. So this should be a fun experiment to do.
What's going on here? Don't have any power. This is right.
Is that gonna be your art for tonight? Is butter making?
A little bit, yeah.
Awesome.
Some of my art. I guess it depends on how long it takes. I'm hoping I can stretch it out for a little while, but it might be real quick. That and I'm going to be making buttermilk in the process of making butter. The heavy cream separates into butter and buttermilk. So I'm not really sure what to do with the buttermilk.
Make pancakes.
Yeah, I'll have to save it and make some pancakes with it, I guess.
It's not hard, man. You just go right over to where your outdoor garbage can is and you throw that shit in there. It's just fucking simple as that.
Problem
Just throw it
solved.
out.
I could do
rotten
that.
milk because it's not rocket science.
Or I could put it in a jar and then put it in my refrigerator and save it forever.
Yeah, you could put it in the back of the fridge, and so people see it in there. You could say, "Oh, it's buttermilk. You want
Buttermilk.
some?" And see who's stupid enough to try it. Oh, why? Why is life full of so many challenges?
Doing all
I
right there?
installed this cool thing. I guess I could show you. Let's see here. Show the world, Sean.
You have no camera on, Sean.
I just turned it on. There we go. Thank you for reminding me. I was transporting myself back and forth inside of my house, so I turned it off for a second. But so if I tap here somewhere, it should like flip around, so everyone doesn't have to look at me. This thing right there. I bought that thing at a secondhand store the other day, and I love it because I have all these extra outlets that I can
Nice.
plug into.
Nice.
But now it's not working.
Oh,
Damn.
Like it quit. Like it worked last week. I mean, you can see I have, all this stuff plugged into it. So maybe
Does
it's
it
let
have
me
a-
know that there was a reason it was at the secondhand store and that it really wasn't interested in having such double duty put on it ever after having been made in 1980 or whatever.
is it fused? Does it have a fuse?
I don't. It's a good question. But
Looks
that
like
light
there's
was
a
on.
switch, so there's probably a fuse in it. There might be a reset
Switches.
button.
Yeah, I'd have to get a screwdriver. I guess I could do that. I could start with maintenance. All
So
right,
this-
start with maintenance.
This
You can do
brings
this,
to
Sean. I'm exhausted. My lady is recovering from surgery and it's been going great, but I'm doing it all day today. So like I'm feeling it.
yeah, man. So this brings to light a very interesting double entendre to the term secondhand store. It means that the second hand is ticking before the product breaks on you.
Yeah. Secondhand store, exactly. I like the idea of buying like a whole store full of secondhands too. That's all that's there.
Yes.
I like that idea a lot. Just it's a store full of secondhands, and you just rooting through them. Like there's some in cases that are expensive that you have to ask very politely to see, like jewelry, and then there's other ones that are just in huge 5-gallon buckets and bags and stuff. You have to pull them out from the bottom shelves and dump them out on a cloth so that they don't go everywhere. That's
We
great.
need-
I love it.
I see a
I can get you a tow by 3 o'clock.
Perfect. Yeah. Somebody want to take me to the secondhand store? Rachel's waving her arms. Like, no, we can't go there. I don't have any time to do that.
I see a meme in the making here with Mercury running along with a bag full of secondhands and Saturn chopping off
right.
his ankles.
Of course. Perfect.
Back here.
Perfect. Yeah.
Clockmaker.
Spend a lot of
Club.
time in secondhand stores. I love secondhand stores. Come on, you could do it, man. What happened? What happened to you?
Seems like it's been a long week since last week.
I agree.
I don't know what it was. Maybe it was that solar eclipse.
Oh yeah, that happened.
Oh, hey Jim,
Yeah.
check this out. Check this out. You see that?
Let's see what you got.
Recognize that?
I can't tell what it is. What is it? Looking blurry,
Recognize that?
Barry.
Yeah, if I hold it like that, you should recognize
It's a miniature chainsaw blade.
it. It is
Yeah?
a miniature chainsaw chain. Yeah, my friend gave it to me. He bought this little miniature chainsaw that you could only buy in Europe, and then he like did stuff to adapt the battery pack so he could use it. And
What
he
a
was using it to
fantastic
cut
friend.
foam
Did
at the
you
shop
carve
and
a
stuff.
turkey with it?
He might have. He
Ridiculous.
definitely
Enough
carved some
bone with it?
stuff.
Very cool toy.
It's an expensive novelty item, but it was so cool. And then the blade broke because obviously you can't really use it too. It's not like a real chainsaw. And
Yeah.
so when the blade broke and it was sitting there, me being Sean, I looked at that and said, "Hey, can I have that? Can I have the tiny broken chainsaw blade, please? I would like to keep it."
Yeah,
Release it
nice.
off.
I was thinking about gluing some diamonds to the blade and then make a miniature diamond blade chainsaw for stone carving.
Well, I mean, yeah, you could do that, but the only problem I see with that is that you end up making such a thorough investigation of glues and then trying to choose the right one and apply it, to glue the diamonds to the blade would be a real challenge.
Yeah. Plus, I found a masonry blade that you can put on a 4.5-inch grinder for like $30. That
Yeah.
does the same thing. So
Yeah, you don't have to do any R&D on tools
Yeah.
to grind stone with.
Does anyone have any manuals for chainsaws that they could read to us? I could run downstairs and open a drawer and find a chainsaw manual and begin reading from it.
You have a
Potentially.
chainsaw manual?
Yeah, does
Yeah, but you have to do it like bibliomancy style. Like you can't just start at the beginning.
Yeah,
there's
please
the-
don't
there's
start
a
at the
qu-
beginning. We
there's
don't
the
want to hear this.
quick
The whole
start guide, and I could describe the diagrams. Okay, there's a diagram here, and then showing
There's going to be
a
so much
blade.
safety information. We're going to almost be, it's going to be impossible to avoid safety information.
The fastest way is to just have Snake Jones teach you how to use a chainsaw. That's what I did.
Yeah.
He gave me a live in-person demonstration.
If anybody would know how to operate a chainsaw, it would definitely be Snake Jones.
This
That was
guy one
like-
time.
I think Gabriel was there to witness that, right, buddy?
Oh yeah. I love the part where he says, "Don't let it do this."
Yeah.
This
Yeah,
guy
lots
tried
of
to get me
graphic
to run a
pantomiming.
chainsaw. I was volunteering one time on a work crew, and this guy's like, "You run a chainsaw?" And I said, "No." He's like, "Well, here, let me show you how to do it." And I said, I didn't say I don't know how to run a chainsaw. I said, "No, I don't run a chainsaw." So he still proceeded. I'm like telling him, like, I'm here volunteering. If you think I'm going to start and run a chainsaw, then you're stupid. I'm not going to do it. I don't have any interest to run a chainsaw. Thank you. But he tried to teach me how to do it and showed me by laying the blade across his leg. He's like, "You lay the blade like this and you pull on the thing." And I just looked at him. I didn't say anything. I was being polite because I was volunteering.
The script
I just looked at him like, bro.
the script for Walla Walla Chainsaw Massacre has yet to be written.
I don't know about that. It might not be published anywhere, but it's probably been written. Oh man, I see that.
That is an awesome story.
Hey, do you have something to read for us? Maybe from a Tracy Twyman book that you were reading from? Is there some knowledge we could learn from trees and growth?
Let's see. Now that was Chance reading that one.
Yep,
Okay.
Chance is sitting on my copy.
Okay.
Yeah. Hey, wait, it's my copy. I couldn't wait for Flow States, and I already read the whole thing. But if you guys want me to pull some gravy from it,
If anyone's,
I was
if anyone's got
gonna
something
read
ready to
something a little shorter though. It
That's
goes
fine.
a little
Twyman is
something like
Twy-
weaving spiders welcome, Suite 279, 307 South 9th Avenue, Walla Walla, Washington. Oh wait, sorry. 99362.
I see SB Elger put that on his YouTube channel. I think I tweeted that video this afternoon on my Twitter, Marcus86ED, Marcus86 on Twitter. And that's on SB Elger's YouTube channel to find I think it's a 3-minute looping video of
What?
Jim singing the P.O. Box medley.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, I uploaded the one you gave me, bro.
Yep.
It's officially on the
There.
SB Outro YouTube. There's a reason I didn't tell you. I knew you would not be overly pleased with the idea that I
With
published your work.
with the digital cats meowing.
Is digital cats meowing in it?
Yes. Yep.
Nice.
Yes.
I'm gonna have to check that out.
Okay, now. Oh, this would be a way I can test too. Hi, Benny. What's on you doing? Oh, that's one.
You guys want me to bibliomancy some Twyman though?
Let's hear
Yeah,
some
sure, man,
words.
do that.
I got some food to chew on.
Okay. And is now a good time? I got the book.
Sounds
Great,
great.
go for it.
All right. Starting from page. I just opened up to page 164. This is Money Grows on the Tree of Knowledge, Tracy R. Twyman. As sick as it may seem, those practicing child sacrifice may have been under the impression that they were raising the child up to a higher level of being, just as the alchemist dissolves the prima materia and cooks it by degrees through various processes until it is perfected as the philosopher's gold. One bizarre and disturbing aspect of the myth of the harvest goddess Demeter seems to indicate that this was a belief that at least some people had in the ancient world. In the myth, Demeter, disguised as an old woman, was searching the earth for her lost daughter, Persephone, who, unbeknownst to her, had been kidnapped and taken to the underworld. Along the way, Demeter came to Eleusis and was taken in by the household of King Kalos. She was put in charge of babysitting the king's infant son, who she became so smitten by that she decided she was going to make him immortal. She went about this by feeding him ambrosia every evening and then roasting him slowly every night on the hearth. As each day went by, a little more of his mortality burned away. Eventually, he would have become a god, just like the philosopher's gold might be created from lead through repeated distillations. Unfortunately for Demeter, the process was intercepted by the queen, who was horrified to find her son roasting alive on the coals. Perhaps this connects with the myth of the phoenix, the sacred bird of Phoenicia, where Baal Moloch was worshipped. The phoenix allegedly descends from heaven down to the firestone and is burned to ashes. But then, by virtue of the stone, a new egg is formed out of the ashes, and from it the phoenix is born again. Similarly, in Wolfram von Eschenbach's version of the Grail myth, the Holy Grail is the Firestone. As Malcolm Godwin sums it up, the hermit tells Parzival that many Templars abide with the Grail in Montsalvesche. They live by the virtue of a stone called lapis exilis. By the power of the stone, the phoenix is burned to ashes, but the ashes restore it to life more beautiful than before. The stone nourishes, restores, and promotes youth. Lapis exilis derives from lapis exili, which means the stone of death. The etymology of Holy Grail, called in French the Sang Grail, is one of contention, and many believe it was a play on the French words sang and rial, meaning royal blood. Another argument that has been made is that grial comes from the French gredale, a dish used for serving a meal with several courses. According to the online etymology dictionary, this French word is also related to the words griddle, gridiron, and grill. In other words, we are talking about cooking something over an open flame through a succession of processes. As for the alchemists, however, they cooked their babies in the athanor, a word which literally means digesting furnace. The most commonly used athanor was the Balneum Marie, now known commonly as the Bain Marie, a double boiler invented by Maria Prophetessa. Sometimes called Mary the Jewess, she was one of history's most influential alchemists, active during the 2nd century. The name of the object comes from balenium, the Latin word for bath or bathhouse. Mary the Jewess was said by some to be an incarnation of Miriam, the sister of Moses, about whom there is a legend that Hermes gave her the emerald tablet for safekeeping. Others relate her in some metaphysical sense to Mary Magdalene, who famously transformed a white egg into a red egg as part of a miracle she performed for the Emperor Titus. Mary Magdalene, of course, has been interpreted by some as the living Holy Grail, as they believe she carried the sacred royal blood of Jesus in her womb. Sorry, my dog is just trying to get up in my business. Hold on. Okay.
Plus,
Mary
Santa.
Mary the Jewess wrote a poem describing the alchemical process that became known as Mary's Cry. It states, 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, and out of the third comes the 1 as the 4th. I was just talking about that on Vibrant. Alchemy consists of a series of unions, births, deaths, and rebirths. This procreation and sacrifice symbolism is central to the whole art. The image of a baby, the alchemical homunculus, or little man, boiling in the upper chamber of the Balneum Marie, is one of the most commonly reproduced among alchemical manuscripts. At a certain stage in the process, called the red stone, or the reddening, the child is referred to as the red baby, or the red man. This brings to mind a newborn or fetus covered with afterbirth, as well as a child whose skin has been made red by being cooked over a flame. Other aspects of the alchemical process, as described allegorically in the old manuscripts, match up quite handily with the old pagan fertility rituals recreating the goddess's marriage to, and then murder of, her son, the dying and reborn sun god. Almost always, the process is described as involving a chemical wedding of the king and the queen, or the sun and the moon. The moon is associated traditionally with silver and is considered female, related to procreation. Meanwhile, the sun is equated with gold, masculinity, and semen. Sometimes the king and the queen are said to represent sulfur and mercury. At any rate, shortly after the wedding, the king is sacrificed and his body dissolved. In The Mystery of the Cathedrals by Fulcanelli, there's a photograph of a relief on the central porch of Notre Dame in Paris, which the author labels, "The Queen kicks down Mercury, servus fugitivus." Fugitivus. Within the text, he provides a more complete description of it. A queen, seated on a throne, kicks over the servant, who comes with a cup in his hand to offer her his services. This could just as easily be a depiction of the goddess of the ancient world abusing her young husband, who was in reality her sex slave. Servus fugitivus means runaway slave. Matthias Franciscus Maria van den Berg wrote about this concept in his alchemical analysis of Mozart's opera, The Magic Flute. He said that Mercury was the universal agent, whose blood was used as a solvent to wash gold from out of the dross of other metals, and was also viewed as a coagulant that could unite elements to turn them into gold. Alchemists thought this was possible only because, in their view, Mercury contained within himself both lunar and solar essences, and was thus naturally hermaphroditic. Because of his work as a mediator, Mercury was viewed as a slave by alchemists and was literally called a servitor. This is a term now used by ceremonial magicians to refer to demons that can be captured and bound to serve the master's wishes, like the proverbial genie in a bottle. Likewise, in keeping with Mercury's reputation as a trickster god, alchemists were warned that the philosophic Mercury needs to be somehow imprisoned or kept on a leash. As 17th century alchemist Irenaeus Philathetes put it, "You must be very wary how you lead him, for if he can find an opportunity, he will give you the slip and leave you to a world of misfortune." Mercury was described in terms very similar to that of the devil. This makes sense when you consider that the earlier Greek legends of this god as Hermes depict a man that was half goat and looked very much like the modern conception of Satan. The admonition to alchemists about the importance of imprisoning mercury could be a warning to trap the mercury vapors that are emanated during the chemical process rather than breathing them in, which famously causes madness. This was done via the vas hermeticum, or the vase of Hermes, closed airtight to prevent mercury leakage, which is the actual origin of the term hermetically sealed. This was part of what was called fixing the mercury, and this is the practical reason why Kronos is shown in the manuscripts, chopping off Mercury's feet to prevent his escape. As Vanderberg notes, alchemy involves breaking these substances down into their base components, which he believed is the reason for the profusion of alchemical images depicting violent death and dismemberment. The substance must fall apart completely, be smelted, and die in order to be fertile again afterwards. Especially mercury needed to be tortured. It is important to realize that there are many layers of meaning to each alchemical symbol, and even when different interpretations seem to conflict, upon reflection, it is usually discovered that they complement each other. Alchemy is really a term that describes the process of creation and transformation in general. It is the way that a baby is made, the way God formed the universe, as well as the way enlightenment is achieved, and it can be used for many other purposes as well. Ultimately, the prima materia of creation can be found anywhere because of the primal transcendental spiritual power that connects every particle in the universe. The Emerald Tablet of Hermes refers to this as the one thing and says of it, its parents are the sun and the moon. The wind carries it in its belly. Its nurse is the earth. In this way was the universe created. From this comes many wondrous applications because this is the pattern. The practice of Taoism, which has been called Chinese alchemy, revolves around this concept of the one thing that is within all and has the power to transform all. The Taoist text, Secret of the Golden Flower, speaks of an immortal spirit body of gold formed in the germinal vesicle of the solar plexus through meditation by cultivating one's qi, astral light, or vital fluids within the body. Eventually, this body crystallizes and becomes a perfected, independent being, a little man, just like an alchemical homunculus, which will live forever after you die. In doing so, he will release you from the obligation to incarnate into future births. The recommended method of achieving this, according to the Secret of the Golden Flower, is to mentally reverse the flow of energy going out of your body and force it to circulate back inward. This is related to the concept of tantric sex magic, in which the golden essences of the sperm are retained within. The thought that this would somehow form a baby, spiritual or otherwise, within the man's own body may be related to the ancient concept that there was actually a homunculus, fully formed but smaller, inside of each sperm. This was, of course, conceived back when sperm could not even be seen with microscopes and were merely theoretical. By following this logic to its natural conclusion, these spermatic homunculi might also contain within them the spiritual essence of all their potential descendants. So by retaining the sperm within, you are keeping all of that spiritual power for yourself by preventing others from being born. Conversely, in the worldview of European alchemists, if you choose to deposit that little bit of gold associated with the sun into the womb of a woman associated with the moon, and thus silver, it coagulates into a baby, the philosopher's gold. As they say, it takes gold to make gold. The golden homunculus in the sperm is turned into a golden child through the alchemical process of gestation. Eating that child after it is produced would then have a similar but more potent effect on the practitioner as compared to someone practicing Tantra or Taoist meditation, a la the golden flower. Knowledge of these secrets brings new meaning to some of the memes of modern pop culture. For instance, in the earliest episodes of The Smurfs, Gargamel is an alchemist on the quest to create gold through ritual magic. According to the magical grimoire he uses, the secret of alchemy is to find these miniature people called Smurfs who live in the forest, and through arcane processes transform them into gold. Prior to the invention of Smurfette, the Smurfs were originally asexual, just like the alchemical homunculus is often an androgyne. In later episodes, Gargamel's goal is to eat the Smurfs, and whenever he manages to catch them, he always attempts to boil them alive in his witch's cauldron. So would people in medieval times have sacrificed their own children, or even those of others, for the selfish goal of manufacturing gold or obtaining eternal youth? They certainly would. And indeed, they would sacrifice their children for much lesser goals as well. Children, up until modern times, were merely disposable resources to be used by their parents or by other adults in the community who had authority over them. An excellent authority on this subject is The Origins of War in Child Abuse by Lloyd de Mouse, in particular Chapter 8, entitled Infanticide, Child Rape, and War in Early States. Here are some vivid descriptions of what life used to be like for the most innocent members of society. Parents in early ancient states proudly sacrificed their children to avenging deities. As I have documented in detail, child sacrifice was the foundation of all great religions. Maccabee's book, The Sacred Executioner, portrays the entire history of religion as based upon a vengeful, bloodthirsty executioner with a child figure, from Isaac to Christ, being killed for the sins of others. Mass burials of thousands of sacrificed infants have been discovered in early states from Germany and France to Carthage, where archaeologists found one cemetery filled with over 20,000 urns containing bones of children sacrificed by their parents, who would kill them if the gods would grant them a favor, like if their shipment of goods were to arrive safely. As Quintilian said, to put one's own children to death is at times the noblest of deeds. Sacrifices are always necessary whenever independence and success is achieved, and the avenging killer mother goddess must be placated. Even when people built new bridges or buildings, little children were usually sealed in them alive as foundation sacrifices to ward off the avenging maternal spirits who resent the hubris of building the structure. Not even ancient Greeks could dispense with human sacrifices. Early reports of burning and eating of children in human sacrifices were followed in classical Athens by practice of keeping victims called pharmakoi, who were ritually stoned to death as scapegoats for the sins of others. Now, this is
Man.
Tracy talking, no longer a quote.
Okay,
This then
we're-
is the past from which we have supposedly evolved into a civilized society, where child abuse and rape, while still quite common, is at the very least frowned upon and even punishable by law. But the notion that true power lies in the sacrifice of one's own child is still at the heart of our religions and our public institutions. It is one of the most closely guarded hidden truths of the ancient mystery schools, the ceremonial magicians, the alchemists, the Rosicrucians, and other secret societies. The truth is that at the very foundation of our modern systems of government, which are controlled by banking and finance, there lies a terrible secret that is in fact the cornerstone of the whole edifice: a child sacrifice to appease the spirits of the other world in order to acquire wealth and accomplish great achievements. Modern particle physicists who have succeeded in increasing the mass of a particle in a vacuum theorized that maybe the extra mass was obtained from the future through interdimensional time travel. The alchemical production of money, artificial gold, by the banking system, seemingly out of nothing, is actually based upon the use of youth and future progeny as resource material to create wealth that can be enjoyed today by their parents. More importantly, that wealth can then be taken by the people whom those parents are obliged to serve. A perfect metaphor for how this works can be seen in the fairy tale Rumpelstiltskin. A young girl's father brags to the king that his daughter has the ability to spin straw into gold. The king then demands that she do it for him, and so her father puts her in a room with a spinning wheel and demands that she somehow produce gold. In her despair, the little girl is contacted by a little man, clearly a demon, who promises to spin the gold for her if she promises him her firstborn child. This is similar to how the state enslaves humanity by demanding taxes that are impossible to pay with the money we presently have. So the demand gets passed down the line to future generations. In the story, the state, represented by the king, demands an impossible payment of gold from one of his subjects. That subject then presses his young daughter into servitude, demanding that she figure out some way to produce this gold magically. This requires her to sacrifice her firstborn child to a demon. In the story Hansel and Gretel, children are kidnapped by a witch who fattens them up for weeks in a cage and then tries to cook them in an oven. This happens after their parents abandoned them in the woods because it is too expensive to feed them. Realizing their fate, the children work together to outwit the witch and shove her into the oven instead. After the children kill the witch, they return home to discover that their mother has died while they were gone. This leads many analysts to believe that the witch was really the mother all along. What we find when we examine mythology, religious traditions, folk legends, and mystical teachings is a recurring theme of the ruling class sacrificing their own children in order to obtain or retain youth, wealth, and power. They are also shown forcing the underclass of society to sacrifice their children to the god and or goddesses of the state, so that the rulers can steal whatever is benefited therefrom. In fact, we find that the underclass are, in some societies, really the descendants of elders from past generations who sacrificed their children by selling them into slavery. This sacrifice can also take the form of abandonment to the wilderness, as in the story of the scapegoat and the exile of Ishmael. Eventually, the abused children rebel against their parents, ally with their enemies, overthrow them through warfare, and then immediately create a slave class of their own to abuse so that they can stay in power. Just look at the story of the Anunnaki gods of Sumer. They were said to have created human beings as a slave race by interbreeding with lower primates. One of the activities their slaves engaged in, interestingly, was mining, something that children in particular have always been recruited for because they can fit in tiny spaces. The Anunnaki then continued to interbreed with select humans over generations to create a race of kings and queens more closely allied genetically with their own race. These were bred to rule over the lesser humans and do some of the more skilled tasks. Is this perhaps how the golden age of Saturn or Kronos was maintained? Through the enslavement and sacrifice of the youth? Is this a memory of a time when nobody had to work because they had somebody to do it for them? No laws were necessary because they were free to take out their aggressions on those who were weaker. Perhaps the rulers never grew old because they could always bathe in the fountain of youth, that is, filled with the blood of infants. This could be why Saturn is remembered as the personification of death. Maybe this is why he is shown by Nicholas Flamel as having hobbled the flight-footed young Mercury with the swing of his blade. It was to keep the young man from trying to get away, because Mercury was his slave. He needed Mercury to make the gold. This could also explain the famous cremation of care ritual performed each year at the Bohemian Grove Summer Encampment in Northern California. This is a secret club to which many of the most powerful people in the United States belong. At the ritual, which takes place on the traditional pagan feast day of Midsummer, a mock baby sacrifice is performed with a bundle of sticks, which is thrown into a fire in front of a depiction of a giant owl. This ritual has rightly been compared by outsiders with the sacrifice of infants to Baal Moloch, especially since the owl, like Baal, was the companion of Ashtoreth, the baby-killing goddess. Most telling, however, is the name given to the sacrificial victim, which also provides the name of the ritual. It is called dull care. The participants are casting aside all of their worldly concerns. Through the sacrifice of the youth of others, they can relax now. As the ritual states, midsummer sets us free. Just like those who came before us, we have been sold into slavery by our ancestors who were simultaneously plied with promises of blessings and threatened with curses until they agreed to offer their children up for sacrifice. As we know, in 1913, the Federal Reserve was created. Known colloquially as the Fed or the Temple, they magically created a gold-pegged money supply out of nothing through fractional reserve lending, using the multiplier effect, and allowed the other banks in the country to do likewise. It was this faith that was the secret ingredient in the magical recipe that allowed the alchemy of fiat currency to work. This process involved selling bonds, backed with the full faith and credit of the United States government. But what did this faith really represent? Well, just like the temples of the ancient world, the Federal Reserve demanded sacrifice. The priesthood of Israel instituted a financial tax scheme as a substitute for the traditional sacrifice of the firstborn child. The Federal Reserve income tax was created for this very purpose, at the exact same time as the Federal Reserve was born. With the passage of the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, which may not have ever even been properly ratified. This enabled the bank to sell the U.S. Treasury's debt with promises of interest payments, paid for by the taxes of every American. Each dollar created by the banking system represents debt owed to the government's creditors. This puts pressure on Americans, not just to obtain money and property for their own comfort, but to have a regular income, so that a portion of that income can be sacrificed to the banking system. This meant that the Fed was able to create money out of nothing, only by enslaving the population, like Mercury having his wings cut off by Saturn. In order to enjoy the imagined benefits of the central bank's alchemical magic, each American would need to become a wage slave. But in the process of creating money out of nothing, which involves conjuring it from thin air, loaning it out on paper, and having it paid back with interest, the banking system sows the seeds of its own demise. This is because the population at large cannot make money out of nothing. They have to either earn it through work, or sell something in exchange for it, or somehow take it from someone else. That means there will always be more money owed to the banks than the banks have put into the system, even though they are the only ones who can do so. This money owed will always get exponentially larger over time because of compound interest. When people cannot make their payments any longer because they've exhausted their ability to earn or steal the magic paper that banks create at will, they default. Then the banks take ownership of their property instead and garnish their future wages. This is exactly what happened in 1933, when the US government declared bankruptcy and defaulted on its debts. As I explained previously, all of the privately owned gold held by American citizens was confiscated. Furthermore, as part of the Joint Resolution 192, to suspend the gold standard and abrogate the gold clause, all of the private property held by citizens of the United States was hypothecated to the creditors of the United States Treasury. That is why we only own real estate, a term that indicates land belonging to the king, the state, for which we pay rent in the form of property taxes. By definition, a person who is forbidden to own property is a slave. This status was solidified with the creation of the Social Security system. Ostensibly, this was created to ensure that the old and frail were not left homeless by their depression-ravaged families who were unable to take care of them. In reality, however, it turned each individual citizen into a securitized asset owned by the banks that owned the government. Each time we fill out a birth certificate for our newborn child, we are having our baby marked with a UPC code and selling it to the banking system. As noted most vociferously by the so-called sovereign citizens movement, the assignment of a social security number to a government subject creates a corporate entity in the name of that particular person. The word corporation means body, and it is legally viewed as an artificial person. Sovereign citizens call it the straw man. I find it quite similar to the alchemical concept of the homunculus. For each one of us, there's essentially a bank account number assigned to that corporate straw man. It is given a credit value based on the assumption that the person associated with the account will have a job and will sacrifice a portion of each paycheck to the Social Security Fund. The government can then spend the money that it is paid into now and borrow against the money that will presumably be paid in the future. This is how we were given over as property to the corporate state by the elite of the so-called greatest generation, who bathed the world in blood during World War II. But the slave grid was going global. In July of 1944, 730 delegates from the 44 Allied nations met at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, for the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference. At this conference, the infamous International Monetary Fund was created. The meeting secured a promise from each country to maintain the exchange rate of its currency within a fixed value of gold. It had always been the right of governments to set their own trade tariffs and quotas up until that point, but the international banking cartel wanted to have total control over that themselves. They used the Great Depression and World War II to break down the resistance of the world's governments. Harry Dexter White, chief American economist and designer of the Bretton Woods system, put the bankers' threat this way: the absence of a high degree of economic collaboration among the leading nations will inevitably result in economic warfare that will be but the prelude and instigator of military warfare on an even vaster scale. The nations were lulled into this trap by being told that economic interdependency would bring peace. United States Secretary of State Cordell Hull embraced the notion, stating, "If we could get a freer flow of trade, freer in the sense of fewer discriminations and obstructions, so that one country would not be deadly jealous of another, and the living standards of all countries might rise, thereby eliminating the economic dissatisfaction that breeds war, we might have a reasonable chance of lasting peace." Well, it was a nice thought, but unfortunately what Hull and other delegates got the United States involved in at Bretton Woods has had the exact opposite effect. Instead, it has depressed living standards globally by shackling nations with incurable debt and brought not peace, but a global police state. What the cartel sold to us all as free trade is in fact a complex system regulating the balance of trade among nations. Thus, an international body decides whether or not a particular nation will be allowed to be prosperous at any particular moment, and when their prosperity will be abruptly cut off. It is exactly the opposite of economic freedom. At the Bretton Woods Conference, the agents for the cartel, viewed by the rest of the world as representing American interests, essentially dictated the terms for all of the other countries and used desperately needed aid money to bribe them into agreement. One of the British delegates at the conference was John Maynard Keynes, who recommended the creation of a world currency unit called the Bancor, backed by a collection of 30 commodities, including gold. For the last 2 centuries, Western governments had tended to base their currencies on a fixed relationship to a gold standard, which was useful not only for stabilizing the currency, but for maintaining exchange rates for international trade. International accounts were settled from one country to another using gold. Roosevelt was not at all opposed to the concept of a global currency and told his Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau, who had helped him design the mysterious $1 bill, to prepare possible designs for a currency he called the Unitas. But at Bretton Woods, the bankers decided that rather than have a global currency based on gold, they would just use the US dollar as the world's reserve currency and force the rest of the world's governments to connect the value of their currencies to the US dollar's relationship to gold. In return, the United States agreed to allow the central banks of other countries to convert their dollars to gold at any time at the fixed price of $35 per ounce, regardless of the market value of gold at that time. This arrangement gave the United States tremendous economic advantages in the short term, but in the long term, only the banks themselves came out on top, as we shall see. This was because the US dollar was not just a currency, but a debt instrument itself. The creation of every dollar earned interest for the Fed, even as it multiplied into ever more interest-earning dollars ad infinitum. Because they convinced our government to agree to redeem the Federal Reserve notes for foreign banks at $35 an ounce, it could be used, just as gold had been, to settle international accounts between central banks. To maintain the balance of payments needed to calculate a proper exchange rate, the central banks of other countries could simply buy or sell dollars. They just had to agree not to ever adjust the value of their currencies beyond plus or minus 1% of the international pegged rate without IMF approval. But notice what this means is that the central banks of other countries, as well as the IMF, were given rights to convert American money to gold, which American citizens themselves did not have. They then sold that gold off to their own central banks throughout the world, as well as the IMF, for $35 an ounce perpetually. That's $35 in the Federal Reserve's own notes. Those banks could then sell that gold on the open market at many hundreds times profit, depending on the street value at the time. When the International Monetary Fund was created, the member nations were asked to chip in a certain quota of money related to the assessed size of that nation's economy. This contribution was made to 75% in that nation's own currency and 25% in gold, or in currency redeemable in gold. In other words, the dollar. So the creation of the IMF on its first day alone resulted in the sale of billions of US dollars to foreign central banks. This was so that they could be placed in a fund controlled from an office on US soil and owned by the same group of stockholders that own the Federal Reserve, which issued the dollars in the first place. Of course, those with a vested interest in the Federal Reserve would prefer to do business in US dollars because the mere creation of dollars bears interest to the Fed due from the United States Treasury. The money and gold amassed from these quotas was then used as reserve funds to make loans to the very countries that had contributed the quotas in the first place. If they could no longer make the interest payments on those loans, they could draw out 25% of their own quota money, but this time as yet another loan from the IMF. Yes, a loan from the IMF to help them make the interest payments on their other IMF loans, which were made to them using the members' own money as a reserve. If that country still needed more money to make their interest payments, they could make agreements to borrow from other countries using the IMF and or its numerous associated institutions as intermediaries for a percentage, of course. I think I'll stop there. Page 201 feels appropriate.
Oh, thank you, Chance.
Fuck yes, thank you. Fuck yes. That really helped. That helped me a lot. Thank you.
It's a great book.
Oh, I miss that lady.
Yes. Yes.
What
It was
a
excellent
wonderful
reading, Chance.
person to talk to every week.
What was she
I miss
like?
her.
What was she like?
Yeah.
The most dry-humored, hilariously beautiful soul you could ever meet in your life. She was absolutely deadpan, dead serious. She talked just like she wrote. If you got her rolling in conversation, she would just, she looked at the world as some kind of a horrible prank that we were all doing our best to endure, and she, up to the time when she vanished into death, she was enduring it pretty well, all things considered, because she had a pretty challenging and strange life. But yeah, I mean, she was amazing. She was that's the thing that makes Tracy different than everyone else that does this kind of stuff, in my opinion, is the fact that she could always chime in with some really subtle but hilarious offhand joke, quip, pun, secret meaning, or tie it all together like Chance was just reading, to where it's flowing along just fine. And it's like, oh, we're just getting all the data. And then it's all of a sudden her throwing the boomers rightly under the wheels of the bus for burning their own children in the fire to, get one more
Yeah.
booze cruise vacation, etc.
Right. Very pertinent. Yeah. These days. Wow.
It's sad. I mean, I saw some people lamenting. There's a lot of trad LARPers on Twitter, and it's very fascinating to watch these people. You know, they want to return to what was good, which I mean, I get it, but to me, it's very short-sighted and ignorant to think, you know, like if you're trying to go back to something that once was, then you should realize you're LARPing, you know, and if you want to dress up and LARP, cool. But don't imagine that you're actually going to somehow bring back what was existing in the past. That's really stupid. But these people were complaining about some boomer couple who had taken the family farm that they had inherited and sold it off so that they could, you know, buy a boat or something. And they were just really upset. And I mean, I get it. It's really upsetting. But I mean, you know, I have great sympathy on every generation because we've all been subject to a series of rituals and participated in against our will all of this stuff that's caused us to become what we are, unless we discover it and start the process of working not against it but out of it. A lot of people
Right.
try to work against their programming, and I think that keeps you in the programming, just like a Brer Rabbit, you know, and Tar
Right.
Baby. You know, if you try to keep fighting the Tar Baby, then you
The
get
way
stuck
out is
more.
through.
Amen, brother. It is. Well, yeah, it is through, and it's through. You know, like the example of Jesus is truly perfect. That, you know, like, all right, so all the worst possible shit's gonna happen to me. It's all good. Okay, I'll deal with that to the best of my ability. You know, that's but it's hard. It's not easy, as we all know. It's really, really hard to accept the world being really fucked up and bad. But you know, I'm sure I was going somewhere. So, but
You're
that
going
time
through.
where yeah, going through. I'm going through it, man. I fixed my electricity. The disappointing part is that apparently there's a little button over there on the wall that has one of those. It's one of those switches that has a button in it. You know, the
GFI ground fault indicator switch.
yes. And every once in a while that thing pops and I don't recognize it. And I should have noticed earlier when there was a little bit of water next to my freezer. And I think I caught it in time. Mostly everything in there is still almost completely solid. So I just got it hooked back up and plugged and working. But it's like,
Freezer
damn it.
should stay frozen for a couple of days if you're not.
Yeah, if
opening
you
it.
don't open it, yeah, exactly. So you know how it is. Like you beat yourself up. This is the first practice that I learned that really started to change my life was to stop running negative shit at myself all the time. And so now, if I notice that there was water on the floor and I then fail to recognize that that's because the freezer is off, later I don't call myself a worthless, stupid fucking piece of shit for 10 hours because I failed to notice. I just go, well, that's too bad I didn't pay attention to what that was. Oh, well.
I
And I just
noticed
proceed.
something about refrigerators. They used to come with latches on them, so they would stay closed. But I wonder if they removed latches because parents were putting their children in the refrigerator to keep them fresh and then latching them closed.
We
That's a good
installed
question.
one to keep children out of it.
Yeah. Well, I've a
Crack
few
me
times
up, Alan.
knocked holes in freezers. That's really good question and very pertinent to the subject matter, Alan. It's a scary question, but you know, whether or not the child already deceased was needing to remain fresh is a reasonable question. I mean, it's I'd like to think that that never happened, but
Well, keep
unfortunately,
in
I don't.
mind that goats are sometimes called kids, and some cultures eat kids.
Yeah, lots of my
Very
stepdad eats
good.
kids. Yes, back when I used to eat meat, sometimes he dug a hole in the ground and made a hot fire, and we cooked a kid in there, and then we fed it to the whole family. So
There you go. Hey, Jim, did you ever get that letter I sent?
Yes, I have it. It's unopened still. If you want
You
me
want
to open
break
it.
it out?
All right. Yeah.
See
Let
what's
me,
in there.
oh, I'm all ears for this. This is exciting. I'm excited now.
Oh, it's just a trifle.
Trifles are best though.
The snails
Nothing
are
like a little
working.
Martin sent some
doggerel in
pretty
the
killer
mail.
gifts, let me tell you.
Yeah, I need to get on this mail.
Hey, thanks, Chance. How's that doing? Have you had it lit up at all lately?
there's a beautiful.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's in a really great visible spot in my bedroom. Nice whenever I want to have more natural lighting
Yeah,
and
yeah.
dim lighting. I go with that. I love it, man. Thank you.
Oh yeah, you bet. What's in that letter? Yeah, I got a new seal with the Tree of Life on it.
I think I remember seeing that part.
Beautiful
'Cause
signet.
Jim,
The old wax seal. We're old school now. Nobody was tampering with that letter.
No, I almost don't
Jim,
want
do you
to.
want to highlight yourself so we can
beautiful.
see it full screen?
Yeah, am I did I highlight myself?
Yeah, I
hey
think
Jim,
so.
yeah,
I
you're
see
you're on
it.
there. I wanted to point out, Jim, you are fucking gorgeous, man. You're such a beautiful dude.
Thank you,
Like
sir.
you look so good with all your hair. Like I would have never imagined you just actually letting it go, and you look fucking badass to the maximum, my friend. I love it. It looks really good.
Absolutely.
There's a beautiful letter here.
Nice.
And some other stuff. I'll read it here. It says, "Dearest web dwellers, since I couldn't find a postcard, this letter will have to do. I enclose a picture of Snake and Jenny. Life on the homestead. Doesn't it look grand? Looks like SB and Alan's moms showed up too. We were celebrating America's war for independence. Seriously, though, it was an epic adventure. Truly what I needed to commune with the tribe. The Joneses' hospitality is top notch. Breaking the ice never felt as natural. Highlights: breaking bread, roasted rabbit, exploring Elephant Rock, St. Park, finding beaver sticks at the beaver pond on Jenny's mom and dad's property, teaching Ellis, Snake's son, 10 years old, to skip rocks, exchanging gifts, exchanging hugs. This tribe has great energy. So good to feel it firsthand. Sounds like the next meetup is in Missouri again at the Astral Valley Art Park.
That's true. Well, I mean, if anyone wants to meet me there, I'm going to be going to a festival called Reconnection
Nice.
on the 19th through the 21st. It's right near St. Louis. I believe Snake Jones is going to be there.
That's what it says. Reconnection Music Art
Jenny B,
Festival.
Snake Jones, myself, maybe others, maybe
What
Martin, hopefully,
what
Gabriel.
month is that?
Oh, I'm planning on going.
May
Awesome.
19th through
Yeah.
22. So that's
That's
Hey,
right.
the guy with the
week.
spaceship was
It's a
talking about
camping
going.
festival. Yeah, I got him a ticket. He's going to bring
That's
the
awesome.
spaceship.
He's
Cool.
bringing
Nice.
it. All right.
He'd bring the
Yeah.
gongs.
I can't
Now what?
wait.
That's this month, Chance?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Yes,
no way I
sir.
can make that.
Says
19th, 22nd.
19th through 22nd, featuring live music, 3 stages, aerial and performing arts, live visionary art, yoga, holistic wellness. I'd go for the live visionary art alone. Can't wait.
I'm doing
to
a
see-
workshop there.
But that's all.
Right
it's
on.
about. That's cool, man. I wish I could make it. See you there or be square.
That's awesome.
Basically, if
Martin.
you flew out to St. Louis, you could get there real easy. Someone could just swing over and pick you up. Anybody that is
Hey.
interested.
No more masks on flights. I went to Vegas this weekend. See my mama.
Nice.
Awesome.
That's so sweet.
Yeah.
What
it
about
was
checking
great.
any information? Are they
Exactly.
trying to look at anybody's crap and
Oh,
try to confirm,
dude,
verify,
check
make
this
do
out.
tests or anything?
Check this out, dude. Oh yeah, there's Snake and Jenny.
I
Mhm.
love it.
And SB and Alan's mom's there.
Oh,
That's nice. That must be Alan's mom in the back.
I think that's my mom's mom. I think that's Thelma there. That looks like Thelma.
And then there's a PS. It says, PS, Jim and Sean, if you guys want to cut that dollar in half, it's no skin off my back. Oops, I hid my dollar pieces so well I can't find them. No cutting needed. Instead, you get our favorite instrument or favorite illuminist, Ben Franklin. There's something in a little special envelope here.
There's no way I'm cutting a metal dollar in half. Now, this one on top of my hat, if you guys want, I'll rip it in half right now, but I'm not cutting any metal dollars.
We used to have a half of a
I still got
$5
my
bill.
five. Right
Still
there.
have it?
Look at there.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's right there in my desk.
I lost my wallet, or else I would still have it.
Oh, that's weird. This is a $1 bill. Ah, this is a different dollar. That's weird, Jim. I don't know what this is.
Beautiful Ben Franklin
Nice.
coins.
Hey,
The
thanks,
fucking
man.
pervert.
Fucking pervert. Fuck you, Benjamin
Yeah.
Franklin.
That's right. You think? Well, yeah. Like we pretty much have it confirmed that that son of a bitch was performing the alchemy that Tracy was describing in her book.
No
They
shit.
found
Yes,
the fucking
it's
Dude,
bodies
you
on his
see,
property.
Do you hear
Every
it? They
time
found
I
kids in his
see or
fucking
hear Ben
basement in
Franklin-
London.
Yeah.
Every
Sick
time I hear the
bastard.
words Benjamin Franklin or read them, I hear Jim's voice. Will you do it
Fuck
again?
you.
Fuck you, Benjamin Franklin.
That's right.
Fuck you.
That dirty old.
I hear it too every time. Anytime I hear Benjamin Franklin, I always hear Jim.
Yeah. That's the whole point, man, and it works.
Also, I'm working on the video for Saturday.
It's gonna be a weird one, real strange.
Oh,
And
Chris, I'm supposed to send you videos, man. I've got a bunch of videos saved on my Google Drive. I'm
Yeah, that's what I
considering
was
going and
gonna say.
highlighting. Yeah,
anyone that has a strange video, please send me. I'm technically already done with it, but to make this one extra strange, not only am I making the video and then folding it in on itself, going forwards and backwards, but I'm making a completely different strange video and putting that on top of that one. So it's like double the video.
nice.
Just
Yeah.
deep
Speaking of
strange.
strange videos, Chris, you guys doing that inspired me to make a intro video similar to that style for our Doctor Strange stream with Gabriel and Gordy.
I figured that might have inspired you because I really like that one too. That was really cool. I like the old classic Spider-Man cartoons you added to that one. That was really awesome. But
Speaking of Spider-Man, you're hanging like Spider-Man.
Yeah,
I
no
know.
shit. That's wild, man.
Also, Alan, do you want to tell me how long this intro is?
Oh, it's the standard about 20 minutes. Not longer than 20. I'll never take longer than 21 minutes
I'll never
on a
tell.
strange intro.
You
for-
also told me that you never do it longer than, what was it, 14?
I said that
Nah.
I said that version of the power anthem, but the strangeness cannot be contained in less than 20 minutes, and we do need that time for a solid Wim Hofing before the show, which takes about 16 minutes to do. So that's the math on that.
Also, big news really quick. The art, like the one that's behind me, is going to be showcased at my work and other places around Springfield, possibly.
Awesome.
I was showing my coworker some of my art, and in our center we have displays of art from the Springfield art place, like the state whatever group that's gets art to all the different buildings, and
Awesome.
Beautiful. That's beautiful.
she gave me their number to get in contact to get some prints made, like some professional grade prints, and to be made.
As we're
Will you
chatting,
give me that contact info?
I can send you a picture of the business card she gave me.
Yeah,
As we're
that'd be
chatting,
great.
do
Just
we have
because
someone else
I need a
prepared
better
to read?
quality printer for my art prints, and I was actually looking to solve that situation pretty soon to get some of my recent FlowState art made into prints to take to the festival.
Yeah.
Hey, I've got a
send you a
good
picture.
service that I use for my professional stuff too, so I can send that to you too, Chance.
Yeah,
Thanks,
that'd be great.
team. You guys are the best.
Also, Sean, if you want to send that to me as well, just so I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
like a backup. There's no.
I mean, I don't tell people that it's what I use just because it takes some of the je ne sais quoi out, you know. So please don't just drop it on all over the place. I mean, you can really, but you know, like I feel like keeping it
This
somewhat of a
conversation
secret.
never happened.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
conversation never happened.
Someone
yeah,
is
your guys'
preparing to read, and who is the next reader?
I can read if you want. Kurt Vonnegut while mortals sleep. Girl pool.
Martin, are you ready to read tonight too? You can read after Sean if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. What time is it?
We don't look at clocks.
Maybe we should
here.
let Martin go
Yeah,
first. He's
if you
2
want to go
hours
first,
later
Martin,
than
we're all
Sean.
we're all
No,
good.
I
Martin,
just-
if you want to go first.
I just wanted to see if it was midnight yet, because I think Kaylee doesn't she have a birthday at midnight?
Oh.
But she's
Sure.
also she's an hour behind us, Martin.
Ah.
So it'll have to be midnight and then +1.
Well, let's start the
Time,
celebration
can't we
now.
move time a little bit?
We can.
No, we can wait 2 hours. That's fine.
I want to see. Okay, I'm gonna see how long Jenny is.
I
I'd
mean,
Go
like to
ahead,
do
man.
Jenny.
You read. There she
We could
is.
celebrate for like the whole night. I'm cool with that. You know what I mean?
Happy birthday, Kaylee.
Happy birthday.
Okay.
Happy
Good
birthday.
birthday, Kaylee.
Good.
We love you.
I love you too.
Sweet 16 and never been kissed. Okay, this story, you know what? I'm just gonna risk it. It might be kind of long, but I really love this one. So for some background information, Kurt Vonnegut Jr. has been my very favorite author since one time when I went into the library at the community college in Walla Walla and told the librarian that I was no longer interested to read shitty horror fiction like Stephen King and that I needed something else. And she gave me Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut Jr. And she also gave me Jitterbug Perfume by Tom Robbins. And she changed my fucking life forever in a way that cannot be described in words. She completely blew my mind. And something, here's a nice synchronicity since we are spiders. I just read a really awesome, tiny, short little book. I found it at the bookstore. And I read almost the entire book while I was drinking my coffee while my lady continued to shop for a little while because I was a little tired and wanted to rest. And it's called The Museum of Rain. It's really short, and anyone, if you find it, check it out. It's really good. But the strange synchronicity is that apparently the man who wrote that book, Dave Eggers, who has the same last name as my grandmother on my father's side, whom I never met before she married my grandfather, who tried to have me aborted. Fuck you, Benjamin Franklin. Oh, wait, no. That's Leslie Raymond Rhodes. Fuck you, Leslie Raymond Rhodes. I mean, I love you anyway, Grandpa, and I got the money you were trying to prevent me from getting too. So, but yeah. So anyway, this is a compilation of Kurt Vonnegut short stories called "While Mortals Sleep," and this was kind of like his bread and butter work. What he was is he was a propagandist for one of the big like Westinghouse or one of the big GE or something, and he would write articles. To get their technology into the newspapers and magazines. And so it was kind of like what we call a magalog, or, you know, it's just like they write it and it makes it seem like it's just an interesting article, but really it's them buttering up the skids so that they can all slide us down into their new technology advancements and stuff. So he realized that he could actually make more money at the time back then making writing kind of fantastical science fiction. His science fiction isn't quite like other science fiction, but he was still in that category. And these are those old bread and butter stories that would have been published in the Saturday Evening Post or things like that. Let's see. Let's over here. Let's also give the. Looks like this was published in 2012, but sure these stories were. I thought it might tell you when some of the stories were published. Probably more like in the 50s, you know, late 40s, middle 50s would be my guess. But anyway, I really love this one. I'm pretty sure this is the story. It's called Jenny. Oh, let's get the beverage nearby too here. Gonna have a bevy, mate. Okay. Kurt Vonnegut Jr., Ginny from the compilation While Mortals Sleep. George Castro used to come back to the home works of the General Household Appliance Company just once a year to install his equipment in the shell of the new model GHA refrigerator. And every time he got there, he dropped a suggestion in the suggestion box. It was always the same suggestion. Why not make next year's refrigerator in the shape of a woman? Then there would be a sketch of a refrigerator shaped like a woman with arrows showing where the vegetable crisper and the butter conditioner and the ice cubes and all would go. George called it the Fuda Mama. Everybody thought the Fuda Mama was an extra good joke because George was out on the road all year long, dancing and talking and singing with a refrigerator shaped like a refrigerator. Its name was Ginny. George had designed and built Ginny back when he'd been a real comer in the GHAR research laboratory. George might as well have been married to Ginny. He lived with her in the back of a moving van that was mostly filled with her electronic brains. He had a cot and a hot plate and three-legged stool and a table and a locker in the back of the van. And he had a doormat he put on the bare ground outside when he parked the van somewhere for the night. Ginny and George, it said. It glowed in the dark. Ginny and George went from appliance dealer to appliance dealer all over the United States and Canada. They would dance and sing and crack jokes until they'd collected a good crowd in a store. Then they would make a strong sales pitch for all the GHA appliances standing around doing nothing. Ginny and George had been at it since 1934. George was 64 years old when I got out of college and joined the company. When I heard about George's big paycheck and his free way of life and the way he made people laugh and buy appliances, why, I guessed he was the happiest man in the company. But I never got to see Ginny and George until I got transferred out to the Indianapolis offices. One morning out there, we got a telegram saying Ginny and George were in our neck of the woods somewhere and would we please find them and tell George his ex-wife was very sick. She wasn't expected to live. She wanted to see him. I was very surprised to hear that he'd had a wife, but some of the older people in the office knew about her. George had only lived with her for 6 months, and then he'd hit the road with Ginny. His ex-wife's name was Nancy. Nancy had turned right around and married his best friend. I got the job of tracking Ginny and George down. The company never knew exactly where they were. George made his own schedule. The company gave him his head. They just kept rough track of him by his expense accounts and by rave letters they get from the distributors and dealers. And almost every rave letter told about some new stunt that Ginny done that Ginny'd never been able to do before. George couldn't leave her alone. He tinkered with her every spare minute as though his life depended on making Ginny as human as possible. I called our distributor for Central Indiana, Hal Flourish. I asked him if he knew where Ginny and George were. He laughed to beat the band and said he sure did. Ginny and George were right in Indianapolis, he said. They were out at the Hoosier Appliance Mart. He told me Ginny and George had stopped early morning traffic by taking a walk down North Meridian Street. She had on a new hat and a corsage and a yellow dress, he said, and George was all dolled up in his soup and fish and yellow spats and a cane. You would have died. And you know, he's got her fixed up now. And you know how he's got her fixed up now, so he knows when her battery's running down? No, sir, I said. She yawns, he said, and her eyelids get all droopy. Ginny and George were starting their first show of the day when I got out to the Hoosier Appliance Mart. It was a swell morning. George was on the sidewalk in the sunshine, leaning on the fender of the moving van that had Ginny's brains in it. He and Ginny were singing a duet. They were singing the Indiana Love Call. They were pretty good. George would sing, I'll be calling you, in a gravel baritone. Then Ginny would answer back from the doorway of the mart in a thin, girlish soprano. Sully Harris, who owned the mart, was standing by Ginny with one arm draped over her. He was smoking a cigar and counting the house. George had on the dress suit and yellow spats Hal Flourish had laughed so hard about. George's coattails dragged on the ground. His white vest was buttoned down around his knees. His shirt bosom was rolled up under his chin like a window blind. And he had on trick shoes that looked like bare feet the size of canoe paddles. The toenails were painted fire engine red. But Hal Flourish is the kind of man who thinks anything that's supposed to be funny is funny. George wasn't funny if you looked at him closely, and I had to look at him closely because I wasn't there for a good time. I was bringing him sad news. I looked at him closely and I saw a small man getting on in years and all alone in this vale of tears. I saw a small man with a big nose and brown eyes that were just sick about something. But most people in the crowd thought he was a Hal. Just here and there, you'd see a few people who saw what I saw. Their smiles weren't making fun of George. Their smiles were kind of queer and sweet. Their smiles mostly seemed to ask how Jenny worked. Jenny was radio controlled, and the controls were in those trick shoes of George's, under his toes. He would punch buttons with his toes, and the shoes would send out signals to Jenny's brains in the moving van. Then the brains would signal Jenny what to do. There weren't any wires between Jenny and George in the van. It was hard to believe George had anything to do with what Jenny was up to. He had a little pink earphone in his ear so that he could hear everything anybody said to Jenny, even when she was 100 feet away, and he had little rear-view mirrors on the frames of his glasses so he could turn his back to her and still see everything she did. When they stopped singing, Jenny picked me out to kid around with. "Hello, tall, dark, and handsome," she said to me. "Did the old icebox drive you out of the house?" She had a sponge rubber face at the top of the door with springs embedded in it and a loudspeaker behind it. Her face was so real, I almost had to believe there was a beautiful woman inside that refrigerator with her face stuck through a hole in the door. I kidded back to her. "Look, Mrs. Frankenstein," I said to her, "why don't you go off in a corner somewhere and make some ice cubes? I want to have a private talk with your boss." Her face turned pink from pink to white. Her lips trembled. Then her lips pulled down and dragged her whole face out of shape. She shut her eyes so she wouldn't have to look at such a terrible person. And then, as God is my judge, she squeezed out 2 fat tears. They ran down her cheeks, then down her white enameled front to the floor. I smiled and winked at George to let him know how slick I thought his act was, and that I really did want to see him. He didn't smile back. He didn't like me for talking to Jenny that way. You would have thought I'd spit in the eye of his mother or sister or something. A kid about 10 years old came up to George and said, "Hey, mister, I bet I know how she works. You got a midget in there." "You're the first one who ever guessed," George said. "Now that everybody knows, I might as well let the midget out." He motioned for Jenny to come out on the sidewalk with him. I expected her to waddle and clank like a tractor because she weighed 700 pounds, but she had a light step to go with that beautiful face of hers. I never saw such a case of mind over matter. I forgot all about the refrigerator. All I saw was her. She sidled up to George. "What is it, sweetheart?" she said. "The jig is up," George said. "This bright boy knows you're a midget inside. Might as well come out and get some fresh air and meet the nice people." He hesitated just long enough and looked just glum enough to make the people think maybe they were really going to see a midget. And then there was a whir and a click, and Jenny's door swung open. There wasn't anything inside but cold air, stainless steel, porcelain, and a glass of orange juice. It was a shock to everybody. All that beauty and personality on the outside, and all that cold nothing on the inside. George took a sip from the glass of orange juice, put it back in Jenny, and closed the door. "I'm certainly glad to see you're taking care of yourself for a change," he said. You could tell she was crazy about it, and that he broke her heart about half the time. "Honestly," she said to the crowd, "the poor man should be dead of scurvy and rickets by now, the way he eats. An audience is the nuttiest thing there is, if you ever stop to think about it." Here George had proved there wasn't anything inside Jenny, and here the crowd was, 20 seconds later, treating her like a real human being again. The women were shaking their heads to let Jenny know that they knew what a trial it was to get a man to take care of himself. And the men were giving George secret looks to let them know that they knew what a good pain it was to have a woman always treating you like a baby. The only person who wasn't going along with the act, who wasn't being a boob for the pleasure of it, was the kid who'd guessed there was a midget inside. He was sore about being wrong, and his big ambition was to bust up the act with truth. Truth with a capital T. He'll grow up to be a scientist someday. All right, the kid said. If there isn't a midget in there, then I know exactly how it works. How, honey? Said Jenny. She was all ears for whatever bright little thing this kid was going to say. She really burned him up. Radio controls, the kid said. Ooh, said Ginny. She was thrilled. That would be a grand way to do it. The kid turned purple. You can joke around all you want, he said, but that's the answer and you know it. He challenged George. What's your explanation? He said. 3,000 years ago, said George, the Sultan of Alabakar fell in love with the wisest, most affectionate, most beautiful woman who ever lived. She was Ginny, a slave girl. The old Sultan knew there would be a constant bloodshed in his kingdom, said George, because men who saw Ginny always went mad for her love. So the old Sultan had his court magician take Ginny's spirit out of her body and put it in a bottle. Then he locked it up in his treasury. In 1933, said George, Lionel O. Hartline, president of the General Household Appliance Company, bought a curious bottle while on a business trip to fabled Baghdad. He brought it home, opened it, and out came the spirit of Ginny, 3,000 years old. I was working in the research laboratory of GH at the time, and Mr. Hartline asked me what I could provide in the way of a new body for Ginny. So I rigged the shell of a refrigerator with a face, a voice, and feet, and with spirit controls which worked on Ginny's willpower alone. It was such a silly story, I forgot it as soon as I chuckled at it. It took me weeks to realize that George wasn't just hamming it up when he told the story from his heart. He was getting as close to the truth about Ginny as he ever dared get. He was getting close to it with poetry. And hey, presto, here she is, said George. Baloney, the scientific kid yelled, but the audience wasn't with him, never would be. Ginny let out a big sigh, thinking about those 3,000 years in a bottle. Well, she said, that part of my life's all over now. No use in crying over spilt milk. On with the show. She slunk into the mart, and everybody but George and I toddled right in behind her. George, still controlling her with his toes, ducked into the cab of the moving van. I followed him and stuck my head in the window. There he was, the top of his trick shoes rippling with his toes, made a while. There he was, the top of his trick shoes rippling while his toes made Ginny look like a blue streak in the mart. At 9 o'clock on a sunshiny morning, he was taking a big drink from a bottle of booze. While his eyes stopped watering and his throat stopped stinging, he said to me, what you looking at me that way for, Sonny Jim? Didn't you see me drink my orange juice first just like a good boy? It isn't as though I was drinking before breakfast. Excuse me, I said. I got away from the truck to give him time to pull himself together and to give me time too. When I saw that beautiful GHA refrigerator in the research laboratory, Jenny was saying in the mart, I said to George, that's the flawless white body for me. She glanced at me and then at George, and she shut up and her party smile went away for a couple of seconds. Then she cleared her throat and went on. Where was I? She said. George wasn't about to get out of the cab. He was staring through the windshield now at something very depressing 5,000 miles away. He was ready to spend the whole day like that. Jenny finally ran out of small talk and she came to the door and called him. Honey, she called, are you coming in pretty soon? Keep your shirt on, George said. He didn't look at her. Is everything all right? She said. Grand, George said, still staring through the windshield. Just grand. I did my best to think this was part of the standard routine, to find something clever and funny in it. But Jenny wasn't playing to the crowd. They couldn't even see her face, and she wasn't playing at me either. She was playing to George, and George was playing to her, and they would have played in the same way if they'd have been alone in the middle of the Sahara Desert. Honey, Jenny said, there are a lot of nice people waiting inside. She was embarrassed, and she knew darn good and well I'd caught him boozing it up. Hooray, said George. Sweetheart, she said, the show must go on. Why? Said George. Up to then, I'd never known how joyless what they call a joyless laugh could be. Ginny gave a joyless laugh to the crowd, thinking that what was going on was simply hysterical. The laugh sounded like somebody breaking champagne glasses with a ball peen hammer. It didn't just give me the willies, it gave everybody the willies. Did you want something, young man? She said to me. What the hell? There was no talking to George, so I talked to her. I'm from the Indianapolis office. I have a message about his wife, I said. George turned his head. About my what? He said. Your Your ex-wife, I said. The crowd was out on the sidewalk again, confused and shuffling around and wondering when the funny part was going to come. It sure was a screwy way to sell refrigerators. Sully Harris was starting to get sore. Haven't heard from her for 20 years, George said. I can go another 20 without hearing from her and feel no pain. Thanks just the same. He stared through the windshield again. That got a nervous laugh out of the crowd, and Sully Harris looked relieved. Jenny came up to me, bumped up against me, and whispered out of the corner of her mouth, "What about Nancy?" "She's very sick," I whispered. "I guess she's dying. She wants to see him one last time." Somewhere in the back of the van, a deep humming sound quit. It was the sound of Jenny's brains. Jenny's face turned into dead sponge rubber, turned into something as stupid as anything you'll ever see in a department store clothes dummy. The yellow-green lights in her blue glass eyes winked out. "Dying?" said George. He opened the door of the cab to get some air. The big Adam's apple in his scrawny throat went up and down, up and down. He flapped his arms feebly. "Show's over, folks," he said. Nobody moved right away. Everybody was stunned by all this unfunny real life in the middle of make-believe. George kicked off his trick shoes to show how really over the show was. He couldn't make himself speak again. He sat there, turned sideways in the cab, staring at his bare feet in the running boards. The feet were narrow and bony and blue. The crowd shuffled away, their day off to a very depressing start. Sully Harris and I hung around the van, waiting for George to take his head out of his hands. Sully was heartbroken about what had happened to the crowd. George mumbled something in his hands that we didn't catch. "How's that?" Sully asked him. "When somebody tells you, you've got to come like that," George says. "You got to come. If she's your ex-wife, if you walked out on her 20 years ago," Sully said, "then how come you got to fall apart now on account of her in front of my customers, in front of my store?" George didn't answer him. "If you want a train or an airplane reservation or a company car," I said to George, "I'll get it for you." "And leave the van?" George said. He said it as though I'd made a very fat-headed suggestion. "There's $250,000 worth of equipment in there, Sonny Jim," he said. Shook his head. "Leave all that valuable equipment around for somebody to..." His sentence petered out, and I saw there wasn't any sense in arguing with what he was saying because he was really getting at something else. The van was his home, and Jenny and her brains were his reason for being. And the thought of going somewhere without them after all these years scared him stiff. "I'll go in the van," he said. "I can make better time that way." He got out of the cab and got some excitement going, so no one would point out that the moving vans. He got out of the cab and got some excitement going, so no one would point out that moving vans weren't famous as fast transportation. "You come with me," he said, "and we can drive straight through." I called the office, and they told me that not only could I go with Jenny and George, I had to go. They said that George was the most dedicated employee the company had, next to Jenny, and that I was to do anything I could to help him in his time of need. When I got back from telephoning, George was off telephoning somewhere else himself. He'd put on a pair of sneakers and left the magic shoes behind. Sully Harris had picked up the magic shoes and was looking inside. "My God," Sully said to me, "it's like these little buttons all over an accordion in there." He slipped his hand into his shoe. He left it in there for about a minute before he got nerve enough to push a button. "Pho," Jenny said. She was perfectly deadpan. Sully pushed another button. "Pho," Jenny said. He pushed another button. Jenny smiled like Mona Lisa. Sully pushed several buttons. "Burpo Lapino," said Jenny. "Bama Uzits sh," she said. She did a right face and stuck out her tongue. Sully lost his nerve. He put the magic shoes down by the van the way you'd put bedroom slippers by a bed. "Boy," he said, "those people aren't going to come back here. They're going to think it's a morgue or something after the show we put on. I just thank God for one thing." "What's that?" I said. "At least they didn't find out whose voice and face the refrigerators got." "Whose?" I said. "You didn't know?" said Sully. "Hell, he made a mold of her face and put it on Jenny. Then he had her record every sound in the English language. Every sound Jenny makes, she made first." "Who?" I said. Nancy or whatever her name is, Sully said. Right after the honeymoon, he did all that. The dame that's dying now. We made several hundred miles in 16 hours, and I don't believe George said 10 words to me the whole time. He did do some talking, but not to me. It was in his sleep, and I guess he was talking to Ginny. He would say something like, Oofa moofa, and he was snoozing next to me. Then his toes would wiggle in his sneakers, signaling for Ginny to give him whatever answer he wanted her to hear. He didn't have the magic shoes on, so Ginny didn't do anything. She was strapped up against a wall in the dark in the back of the van. George didn't worry much about her until we got within an hour of where we were going. Then he got all then he got as fidgety as a beagle. Every 10 minutes or so he'd think Ginny had busted loose and was crashing around in her brains. We would have to pull over and stop and go around in the back and make sure she was fine. You talk about plain living, the inside of the van looked like a monk's cell in a television station control room. I'd seen floorboards that were wider and springier than George's cot. Everything that was for George in the van was cheap and uncomfortable. I wondered at first where the $250,000 he talked about was, but every time he passed his flashlight beam over Ginny's brains, I got more excited. The brains were the most ingenious, most complicated, most beautiful electronic system I'll ever see. Money was no object where Ginny was concerned. As the sun came up, we turned off the highway and banged over chuck holes into the hometown of General Household Appliance Company. Here was the town where I'd started my career, where he'd started his career, when he'd bought his bridge so long ago. George was driving. The banging woke me up, and it shook something loose in George. All of a sudden, he had to talk. He went off like an alarm clock. Don't know her, he said. Don't know her at all, Sonny Jim. He bit the back of his hand, trying to drown out the pain in his heart. I'm coming to see a perfect stranger, Sonny Jim, he said. All I know is she was very beautiful once. I loved her more than anything on earth once, and she broke everything I had into little pieces. Career, friendships, home, kaput. George hit the horn button, blasted the bejeepers out of the dawn with the van's big bullhorn. Don't ever idolize a woman, Sonny Jim, he yelled. We banged over another chuck hole. George had to grab the wheel with both hands. Steadying down the truck steadied him down too. He didn't talk anymore until we got where we were going. Where we were going was a white mansion with pillars across the front. It was Norbert Horneker's house. He was doing very well. He was assistant director of GHA research. He'd been George's best friend for years before he'd taken George's wife Nancy away from him. Lights were on all over the house. We parked the van behind a doctor's car out front. We knew it was a doctor's car because I had a tag with those twin snakes on it up above the back license plate. The minute we parked, the front door of the house opened and Norbert Honecker came out. He was wearing a bathrobe and slippers, and he hadn't slept all night. He didn't shake hands with George. He didn't even say hello. He started right out with a rehearsed speech. George, he said, I'm going to stay out here while you go in. I want you to consider it your house while you're in there, with complete freedom for you and Nancy to say absolutely anything you have to say to each other. The last thing George wanted to do was go in there and face Nancy alone. I haven't got anything to say to her, he said. He actually put his hand on the ignition key and got ready to start up the van and roar away. She has things to say to you, Mr. Honecker said. She's been asking for you all night. She knows you're out here now. Lean close when she talks. She isn't very strong. George got out, shambled up the walk to the house. He walked like a diver in the bottom of the sea. A nurse helped him into the house and closed the door. Is there a cot in back? Mr. Honecker asked me. Yes, sir, I said. I'd better lie down, he said. Mr. Honecker lay down on the cot, but he couldn't get any rest. He was a tall, heavy man, and the cot was too little for him. He sat up again. Got a cigarette, he said. Yes, sir, I said. I gave him one and lit it. How is she, sir? I said. She'll live, he said. But it's made an old lady out of her like that. He snapped his fingers. It was a weak snap. Oh, I see. She'll live, he said, but it's made an old lady out of her like that. Like that. He snapped his fingers. It was a weak snap. It didn't make any noise. He looked at the face of Ginny and it hurt him. He's got a shock coming in there, he said. Nancy doesn't look like that anymore. He shrugged. Maybe that's good. Maybe he'll have to look at her as a fellow human being now. He got up. He went to Jenny's brains and shook a steel rack that carried part of them. The rack didn't give it all. Honecker wound up shaking himself. Oh God, he said, what a waste, what a waste, what a waste. All the great technical minds of our time, he said, living in a moving van, married to a machine, selling appliances somewhere between Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and Flamingo, Florida. I guess he is pretty bright, I said. Bright, Honecker said. He isn't just George Castro. He's Dr. George Castro. He spoke 5 languages when he was 8, mastered calculus when he was 10, and he got his PhD from MIT when he was 18. I whistled. He never had any time for love, Honecker said. Didn't believe in it. Was sure he could get along without it, whatever it was. There was too much else to do for George to bother with love. When he came down with pneumonia at the age of 35, he had never so much as held the hand of a woman. Honecker saw the magic shoes where George had put them under the cot. He slipped off his bedroom slippers and slipped on the magic shoes. He was pretty familiar with them. When pneumonia hit George, he said, he was suddenly in terror of death and in desperate need of a nurse's touch many times a day. The nurse was Nancy. Honecker turned on Jenny's master control switch. Her brains hummed. A man who hasn't built up a certain immunity to love through constant exposure to it, he said, is in danger of being all but killed by love when first exposure comes. He shuddered. Love scrambled poor George's brains. Suddenly love was all that mattered. Working with him in the laboratory, I was forced to listen 8 hours a day to tripe about love. Love made the world go round. It was love and love alone that the world was seeking. Love conquered all. Honecker tugged at his nose and closed his eyes, trying to remember a skill he'd had long ago. Hello, baby, he said to Jenny. His toes wiggled in the magic shoes. Heh heh, ha ha, handsome, Jenny said. There wasn't any expression in her face. She spoke again, put the sound together better. Hello, handsome, she said to Honecker. Honecker shook his head. Nancy's voice doesn't sound like that anymore, he said. Lower, a little rougher now, not so liquid. Ha ear ha ut fut that fut good ya oh, Jenny said to him. She smoothed that out too. Here, but for the grace of God you go, she said. Say, I said, you're good. I didn't think anybody but George could make her talk. Can't make her seem alive, not the way George can, Honecker said. Never could, not even after I'd had 1,000 hours of practice. You put that many hours in on her? I said. Sure, said Honecker. I was the one who was going to take her out on the road. It was the footloose bachelor who didn't have much of a future in research. I was the footloose bachelor who didn't have much of a future in research anyway. George was the married man who was to stay home with his laboratory and his wife and go on to bigger things. Life surprises made Honecker sniffle. Designing Jenny, he said. That was supposed to be a little joke in the middle of George's career, an electronic joke off the top of his head. Jenny was a little something he was to tinker with while he came drifting back to Earth after his honeymoon with Nancy. Honecker rambled on about those olden days when Jenny was born, and sometimes he would make Jenny chime in as though she remembered those days too. Those were bad days for Honecker because he fell in love with George's wife. He'd been scared to death. He would do something about it. I loved her for what she was, he said. Maybe it was all the pap George was spouting about love that made me fall in love with her. George would say something ridiculous about love or about her, and I'd think up real reasons for loving her. I wound up loving her as a human being, as a miraculous, one of a kind, moody muddle of faults and virtues, part child, part woman, part goddess, and no more consistent than a putty slide rule. And then George began spending more and more time with me, said Jenny. He took to going home from the laboratory at the last possible moment, wolfing down his supper and hurrying back to work on me till well past midnight. He would have the control shoes on all day and half the night, and we would talk and talk and talk. Honecker tried to give her face some expression for what she was going to say next. He punched the Mona Lisa smile button Sully Harris had punched the day before. I was excellent company, she said. I never once said anything he didn't want to hear, and I always said what he wanted to hear exactly when he wanted to hear it. Here, said Honecker, undoing Jenny's straps so she could step forward in the most so she could step forward. Here's the most calculating woman, the greatest student of the naive male heart that ever walked the face of the earth. Nancy never had a chance. Ordinarily, said Honecker, a man's first wild dreams about his wife peter out after the honeymoon. The man then has to settle down to the difficult but rewarding business of finding out to whom he's really married. But George had an alternative. He could keep his wild dreams of a wife alive in Jenny. His neglect of the imperfect Nancy became a scandal. George suddenly announced that I was too George suddenly announced that I was too precious a mechanism to be entrusted into anyone's care but his own, said Jenny. He was going to take his Jenny out on the road or he would leave the company entirely. His new hunger for love, said Honecker, was matched only by his ignorance of the pitfalls of love. He only knew that love made him feel wonderful, no matter where it came from. Honecker turned Jenny off, took off the shoes, lay down on the cot again. George chose the perfect love of a robot, he said, leaving me to do what I could to earn the love of an imperfect, deserted girl. I'm certainly glad she's well enough to say whatever she's got to say to him, I said. He would have gotten that message in any event, said Honecker. He handed up a slip of paper. She dictated this in case she wasn't up to saying it to him personally. I didn't get to read the message right away because George showed up at the back door of the van. He looked more like a robot than he'd ever made Jenny seem. Your house again, your wife again, he said. George and I had breakfast and dinner. Oh, in a diner. George and I had breakfast in a diner. Then we drove over to GHA Works and parked in front of the research laboratory. Sonny Jim, George said to me, you can run along now and start leading a life of your own again, and much obliged. When I got off by myself, I read what Nancy had dictated to her second husband, what she'd said in person to George. Please look at the imperfect human being God gave you to love once, she said to George, and try to like me a little for what I really was, or God willing am. Then please, darling, become an imperfect human being among imperfect human beings again. I'd been in such a hurry to get off by myself that I hadn't shaken George's hand or asked him what he was going to do next. I went back to the van to do both of those things. The back door of the van was open. Jenny and George were talking inside, very soft and low. I'm going to try to pick up the pieces of my life, Jenny. What's left of it, George said. Maybe they'll take me back in the research laboratory. I'll ask anyway. Hat in hand. They'll be thrilled to have you back, said Jenny. She was thrilled herself. This is the best news I've ever heard. The news I've been longing to hear for years now. She yawned and her eyelids drooped. Excuse me, she said. You need a younger man to squire you around now, said George. I'm getting old, and you'll never get old. I'll never know another man as ardent and thoughtful as you, as handsome as you, as brilliant as you, said Jenny. She meant it. She yawned again. Her eyelids drooped some more. Excuse me, she said. Good luck, Angel, she mumbled. Her eyes closed all the way. Good night, sweetheart, she said. She was asleep. Her battery was dead. Dream a little dream of me, whispered George. I ducked out of sight as George brushed away a tear and left the van forever. The end.
And here I thought it was Larry Hagman that found Genie in the Bottle in 1969.
Yeah, that's been coming up. I thought it was weird that he compared it to a genie in the bottle because it keeps coming up in like for some reason somebody said something about it on my Facebook feed, and I think I saw like a picture or a short video clip. So I used to watch that show sometimes. It wasn't my favorite, but I enjoyed it. That and Bewitched, I'm sure all of us older
Right.
guys and gals have watched a little bit of those at least. But yeah,
Oh,
what a
yeah.
strange story, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, I lived in the Vonnegut house in what was sophomore year of college.
Oh, wow.
In Iowa City. Yeah, it was a great old Victorian place. But I didn't have anywhere to stay, so they let me sleep next to the furnace in the basement. I was there
Interesting.
for about a month or so. I didn't spend many nights there, but yeah, it was interesting. I mean,
What
it
a
was a
trip.
cold winter, so
Was
Yeah,
that
so
stayed
next to the
warm.
furnace isn't bad, huh?
Was that his house that he lived in?
yeah, yeah,
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's a trip. I
yeah. It
never
was
even
a trip.
imagined such a thing.
Yeah, it was a cool. It was a kind of well, it wasn't too far from campus, but back in the day, it would have been outskirts of town probably. Uh, but it had a cool old barn and an acreage around it. It was a big old Victorian all brick.
Yeah, his dad was an architect, so he came from money. There's a great book called God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater, and I think it's only about 200 pages, and I recommend that one to everyone because it's the most hilariously strange ending. Like I remember I woke up my high school girlfriend in bed when I got to the end because I was getting down to the last 5 or 6 pages and there was all these loose ends and they weren't tied up. And so then as I got down to like 2 pages, I'm thinking, this son of a bitch, he can't tie this thing up. This book's gonna suck. This is gonna be a shitty book. And he like 2 sentences, the last 2 or 3 sentences, he ties it all together in the most hilarious way. It made me wake up my girl in bed at like 2:30 in the morning. I was roaring with laughter. And
He
obviously I don't
is
want to
funny
spoil it.
writer.
It was amazing, God bless you, Mr. Rosewater. It's great.
So were you a fan of his when you moved into his house?
Yeah, I had read some of his work, sure. Yeah, and I liked it. I can't remember it. It's so long ago. I mean, that would have been 1982.
So when I was 7,
Yeah, long time ago.
5. Or
Good
3, I was
times, though.
4 years old back then. It was a while ago.
Oh, yeah. Well, how
yeah, I
about
think
my
we should
turn?
do it. I'm totally ready to hear you read, man. I was just gonna say I think we should do a show called Interviewing Martin, where we just drill you with questions. What do you figure?
Okay, let's do it, man. I'm game.
All right, I'll keep that. I'll keep that in mind. Well, I'm gonna make a show called or a series called SB Alger is recording conversations, and so we'll definitely include that on the list because I figure anybody that comes back for more than one conversation, it becomes a series of some kind, So
Yeah, sounds
yeah, so I
good.
look forward to it. Awesome. I'm glad you're down. That sounds like fun.
All right. Chapter 10. I didn't get to read last week, so maybe a brief update. Viola's
Let me
parents,
mute.
a spoiler alert, Viola's parents died. Poor girl, she's alone now. All right. Chapter 10, book 1. Che difficile, miglior, Gisbergo escudo e la santa innocenza al petto ignudo. Better defense than shield or breastplate is holy innocence to the naked breast. You guys hear me okay?
You sound good,
Yep.
buddy.
Yeah,
Great.
you sound good.
Thanks. And they buried the musician and his barbiton together in the same coffin. That famous Steiner, primeval titan of the great Tyrolese race, often hast thou sought to scale the heavens, and therefore must thou, like the meaner children of men, descend to the dismal Hades. Harder fate for thee than thy mortal master. For thy soul sleeps with thee in the coffin, and the music that belongs to his separate from the instrument, ascends on high, to be heard often by a daughter's pious ears, when the heaven is serene and the earth sad. For there is a sense of hearing that the vulgar know not, and the voices of the dead breathe soft and frequent to those who can unite the memory with the faith. And now Viola is alone in the world, alone in the home where loneliness had seemed from the cradle a thing that was not of nature. And at first, solitude and the stillness were insupportable. Have you, ye mourners, to whom these Sibyl leaves, weird with many a dark enigma, shall be born, have you not felt that when the death of some best loved one has made the hearth desolate, have you not felt as if the gloom of the altered home was too heavy for thought to bear? You would leave it, though a palace, even for a cabin. And yet, sad to say, when you obey the impulse, when you fly from the walls, when in the strange place in which you seek your refuge, nothing speaks to you of the lost. Have you not felt again the yearning for that very food to memory, which was just before but bitterness and gall? Is it not almost impious and profane to abandon that dear hearth to strangers, and the desertion of the home where your parents dwelt and blessed you, upbraid your conscience as if you had sold their tombs? Beautiful was the Etruscan superstition that the ancestors become the household gods. Deaf is the heart to which the Lares call from the desolate floors in vain. At first, Viola had, in her intolerable anguish, gratefully welcomed the refuge which the house and family of a kindly neighbor, much attached to her father, and was one of the orchestra that Pisani shall perplex no more, had preferred to the orphan. But the company of the unfamiliar in our grief, the consolation of the stranger, how it irritates the wound. And then to hear elsewhere the name of father, mother, child, as if death came alone to you. To see elsewhere the calm regularity of those lives united in love and order, keeping account of happy hours, the unbroken timepiece of home, as if nowhere else the wheels were arrested, the chain shattered, the hands motionless, the chime still. No, the grave itself does not remind us of our loss, like the company of those who have no loss to mourn. Go back to thy solitude, young orphan. Go back to thy home. The sorrow that meets thee on the threshold can greet thee, even in its sadness, like the smile upon the face of the dead. And there from thy casement, and there from without thy door, thou seest still the tree, solitary as thyself, and springing from the clefts of the rock. but forcing its way to light. As through all sorrow, while the seasons yet can renew the verdure and bloom of youth, strives the instinct of the human heart. Only when the sap is dried up, only when age comes on, does the sun shine in vain for man and for thee. Weeks and months, sad and many, again passed, and Naples will not long suffer its idol to seclude itself from homage. The world ever plucks us back from ourselves with 1,000 arms. And again, Viola's voice is heard upon the stage, which mystically, faithful to life, is in naught more faithful than this, that it is the appearances that fill the scene, and we pause not to ask what realities they are the proxies. When the actor of Athens moved all hearts as he clasped the burial urn and burst into broken sobs, how few there knew that it held the ashes of his son. Gold, as well as fame, was showered upon the young actress, but she still kept to her simple mode of life, to her lowly home, to the one servant whose faults, selfish as they were, Viola was too inexperienced to perceive. And it was Gianetta who had placed her when first born in her father's arms. She was surrounded by every snare, wooed by every solicitation that could beset her unguarded beauty and her dangerous calling. But her modest virtue passed unsullied through them all. It is true that she had been taught by lips now mute the maiden duties enjoined by honor and religion, and all love that spoke not of the altar only shocked and repelled her. But besides that, as grief and solitude ripened her heart and made her tremble at times to think how deeply it could feel, her vague and early visions shaped themselves into an ideal of love. Until the ideal is found, how the shadow that it throws before it chills us to the actual. With the ideal, ever and ever, unconsciously and with a certain awe and shrinking, came the shape and voice of the warning stranger. Nearly 2 years had passed since he had appeared at Naples. Nothing had been heard of him, save that his vessel had been directed some months after his departure to sail for Leghorn. By the gossips of Naples, his existence, supposed so extraordinary, was well nigh forgotten. But the heart of Viola was more faithful. Often he glided through her dreams. And when the wind sighed through that fantastic tree, associated with his remembrance, she started with a tremor and a blush, as if she had heard him speak. But amongst the train of her suitors was one to whom she listened more gently than to the rest, partly because perhaps he spoke in her mother's native tongue, partly because in his diffidence there was little to alarm and displease, partly because his rank nearer to her own than that of lordlier wooers prevented his admiration from appearing insult, partly because he himself, eloquent and a dreamer, often uttered thoughts that were kindred to those buried deepest in her mind. She began to like, perhaps to love him, but as a sister loves, a sort of privileged familiarity sprung up between them. If in the Englishman's breast arose wild and unworthy hopes, he had not yet expressed them. Is there danger to thee here, lone Viola? Or is the danger greater in thy unfound ideal? And now, as the overture to some strange and wizard spectacle closes this opening prelude, wilt thou hear more? Come with thy faith prepared. I ask not the blinded eyes, but the awakened sense. As the enchanted isle, remote from the homes of men, ove alcun legno raro o non mai valdale nostre sponde, where ship seldom or never comes from our coasts, is space in the wary ocean of actual life to which the muse or sibyl, ancient in years, but ever young in aspect, offers thee no unhallowed sail. Quinci ella in cima a una montagna disascende, disabitata e d'ombre oscura e bruna, e par incanto e lei nevose rende. Le spalle e i fianchi e senza neve alcuna, gli laschia il capo verdigante e vago, e vi fonda un palagio appresso un lago. There, she a mountain's lofty peak ascends, unpeopled, shady, shagged with forest brown, whose sides by power of magic halfway down, she heaps with slippery ice and frost and snow. But sunshiny and verdant leaves the crown, with orange woods and myrtles, speaks, and lo, rich from the bordering lake and palace rises slow. She's on her own now.
You have a lovely cadence when you're reading. Thank you, Martin.
Yes.
Oh,
thank you.
thanks, Kaylee. Thank you. Yeah, it's something I work on. It's
I
fun to
second
get.
that. It was lovely.
Oh, thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. It's that flow, you know. We're in the flow state, baby.
Here, here. No, I was thinking about your cadence while I was reading, thinking, well, you know, just pretend you're Martin. Pick something up here. Get something that goes da 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 da. But of course, Vonnegut's writing is very different, anyway.
Yeah, you got that right.
This turned right into butter at the end of your story there.
Sweet.
Like an instant change. Well, I'm not sure if it's butter yet. It's more of like a creamy something.
What are you mixing there?
There.
Making butter. Making
Oh,
some butter.
nice.
Never made it before. I got some heavy cream, but it has some carrageenan, which I didn't realize when I bought it. I didn't even look. It's like a red seaweed sort of additive that it's like a clumping agent or something.
Yeah, coagulant.
Correct. Yeah. So it might have made it take longer, but and I was under the impression that it was going to turn into butter and buttermilk at the same time, but I'm not seeing any buttermilk. But I might not have mixed it enough yet. It's looking pretty pretty buttery right now.
I love that you're using a power tool for that.
Well, of course. Cement
work
mixer.
work smarter, not harder. That's perfect. I love it.
Yeah, I saw it at the Home Depot and I was like, whoa, that mixer's awesome. I bet I could find something I could mix with that thing. Gotta pick it
Fun.
up.
Buy the tool, then make the project. I love it.
Yeah, that's very Jim.
It's such a man.
This is why
thing.
me and Jim became very close friends. This kind of thinking.
Although I might do that kind of stuff too, just not with power tools. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, it was only like $7.99 for this
Sweet.
welded steel egg beater paddle. And I was like, that's the price is so good, I can't afford not to buy it.
Trent's coming home with me. You're coming home with me, buddy.
Ready for some industrial mixing?
Yeah. Like, oh, I can mix cement and butter. Time.
It makes me imagine that the thing is all excited that it's not going to be used for rudimentary stuff, you know? Like, oh,
Just
this guy's
don't-
not buying me to go down to the job site. I'm so stoked. I wonder what I'm going to do.
Just don't get the butter and cement confused.
Yeah,
That's good advice.
if the bread falls face down with the cement on it, it changes the game completely.
So, do you guys want to hear some Celestine prophecy?
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
bet.
I'm gonna go, but I'm gonna listen. I'm just running out of light.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for hosting. You
Thanks
guys are
for showing
making
us
some cool
your
stuff.
skull.
That skull is gonna look awesome when you get done with it. It looks so cool so
Oh
far.
yeah, I didn't get to see it because I was moving around. Will you show it one time before you go?
Yeah, I'll take better pictures of it too when I have some better light. But
Did you take the photo of yourself with the eye through the leaves?
not yet. Oh yeah, I did.
Great. It's a great picture.
I was trying to do a photo challenge and didn't really make it through the whole month.
Yeah, that skull is gonna be awesome. Now, is that a commission for somebody?
No, not yet. This is just-
Wow.
That's gorgeous.
Yeah. I have
Yeah,
some.
it's gonna be badass.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what to do with it up top, up here, but it does look pretty good so far.
I think that's where the cop lights go.
Yeah, exactly.
Let it tell you. Just
Yeah.
sit with it for a little
Yeah.
bit. Let it
Oh
tell
yeah,
you.
I'm gonna let it sit overnight and see how it goes in the morning. So
Obviously, I was just kidding. I really think police lights there would look pretty silly.
yeah, no, something cool.
It does look really cool though.
Thanks.
Handle holder.
Right.
Bell.
What is that, elk?
That'd be epic. I think it's just deer. I think it's just a regular deer. I actually have its matching jawbones. They're too far away, but yeah, I have its jaws. This is the same skull that's in the 19 feathers photo. I just figured that out today.
Yeah, that's a nice find.
Yeah, yeah, I'm super grateful for the chance to get to paint it and do something cool with it.
Yeah,
Right.
very cool.
Thank you for showing us.
Yeah, thanks you guys.
I
And
look
thank you
forward
for
to the
the
progress.
reading. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Very good stuff.
Thanks for reading, Martin and Sean and Chance. See you guys later.
Pleasure.
Yep, see you around.
Bye,
Have
Rachel.
a good night.
Have a good night. Dream well.
Bye.
Auf Wiedersehen.
All right.
I hear our next reader queuing up. She's in the bullpen.
She's ready. Yeah, the bullpen. Ready to charge.
Is it your birthday yet?
In 5 minutes.
Ooh, nice.
It
So you're gonna
is.
liminal space right through the birthday during your reading.
Yeah, it's sweet. Love it. Okay.
Okay, I'm muting again so I don't make lots of noises.
So in the last chapter, we learned how to engage the flow, which is basically what we're doing. But being clear on your questions, always being aware of the beauty around you, and following the coincidences where they take you. This chapter is called The Interpersonal Ethic. And honestly, side note, astrology note, I think it's perfect that I finally got to this chapter in the eclipse window between the new moon in Taurus and the full moon in Scorpio, as the Scorpio and Taurus axis talk a lot about, well, security, but possession. Taurus is I have, Scorpio is we have. And as that relates to relationships, especially with Scorpio involved, lower side Scorpio can be really possessive. High, like, it's all about intimacy and stuff. So I love it. Love it. And this is learning how to deal with that. Okay. The interpersonal ethic. I followed the soldier up the steps and out into the bright sunshine. Pablo's warning was echoing in my head. Addiction to another person. What did he mean by that? What kind of addiction? The soldier led me down the path towards the parking area where two other soldiers stood beside a military jeep. They watched us intensely as we walked their way. When I was close enough to see inside the jeep, I noticed that a passenger was already sitting in the back. Marjorie. She looked pale and anxious. Before I could catch her eye, the soldier behind me grabbed my arm and directed me into the seat beside her. The two other soldiers climbed into the front seats. One sitting on the driver's side glanced back at us briefly. Then he started the vehicle and headed north. Do you speak English? I asked the soldiers. The soldier in the passenger seat, a beefy man, looked at me blankly and said something in Spanish that I couldn't understand, then turned curtly away. I turned my attention to Marjorie. Are you all right? I asked in a whisper. Her voice faded, and I noticed tears were flowing down her face. It's going to be okay, I said, putting my arm around her. She looked up at me, forced a smile, then rested her head on my shoulder. A ripple of passion filled my body. For an hour, we bounced along the unpaved road. Outside, the landscape grew continuously more lush and jungle-like. Then around one bend, the dense vegetation opened up into what appeared to be a small town. Wood frame buildings lined both sides of the road. 100 yards ahead, a large truck blocked the way. Several soldiers motioned for us to stop. Beyond them were other vehicles, some with flashing yellow lights. I became more alert. As we pulled to a stop, one of the soldiers outside walked up and said something I couldn't understand. The only word I recognized was gasoline. Our escorts left the jeep and stood outside talking with the other soldiers. They glanced at us occasionally, weapons at their side. I noticed a small street which angled to the left. As I looked at the shops and doorway, something changed in my perception. The shapes and colors of the buildings suddenly stood out and became more distinct. I whispered Marjorie's name, Marjorie, and felt her look up. But before she could say anything, an enormous explosion rocked the jeep. A blast of fire and light shot up from the area in front of us, and the soldiers were blown to the ground. Immediately, our vision was obscured by smoke and falling ash. Come on, I yelled, pulling Marjorie from the vehicle. Amid the confusion, we ran down the street in the direction I had been looking. Behind us, I could hear distant shouts and moans. Still engulfed with smoke, we ran perhaps 50 yards. Suddenly, I noticed a doorway to the left. In here, I shouted. The door was open and we both ran inside. I fell against the door, closing it securely. When I turned around, I saw a middle-aged woman staring at us. We had dashed into someone's house. As I looked at her, attempting a smile, I noticed that the woman's expression was not one of horror, nor anger. at having had two strangers rush into her house after an explosion. Instead, what she displayed was an amused half smile that looked more like resignation, as though she half expected us and now had to do something. On a chair nearby was a small child of about 4 years old. Hurry, she said in English. They will be looking for you. She ushered us to the back of a sparsely furnished living room, through a hall, and down some wooden steps to a long cellar. The child walked at her side. We moved quickly through the cellar and up some other steps to an outside door leading to an alley. The woman unlocked a small, compact car which was parked there and hurried us inside. She directed us to lay down in the back seat, threw a blanket over us, and pulled away in what seemed to be a northerly direction. Through it all, I remained speechless, carried along by the woman's initiative. A rush of energy filled my body as I fully realized what had happened. My intuition of escape had occurred. Marjorie lay beside me, her eyes tightly closed. Are you all right? I whispered. She looked up at me with tearful eyes and nodded. After about 15 minutes, the woman said, I think you can sit up now. I pushed away the blanket and looked around. We seemed to be on the same road as before the explosion, only farther north. Who are you? I asked. She turned and looked at me with her half smile. She was a shapely woman of about 40 with shoulder-length dark hair. I'm Carla Dees, she said. This is my daughter, Marita. The child was smiling and looking over the passenger seat at us with large, inquisitive eyes. Her hair was jet black and also long. I told them who we were, then asked, How did you know to help us? Carla's smile grew wider. You were running from the soldiers because of a manuscript, aren't you? Yes, but how did you know? I know the manuscript too. Where are you taking us? I asked. I don't know that. You will have to help me. I glanced at Marjorie. She was watching me closely as I spoke. Right now, I don't know where to go, I said. Before I was captured, I was trying to get to Iquitos. Why did you want to go there? She asked. I'm trying to find a friend. He's looking for the ninth insight. That is a dangerous thing. I know. We will take you there, won't we, Marita? The little girl giggled and said with a sophistication beyond her years, Of course. What kind of explosion was that back there? I asked. It was a gas truck, she answered. Earlier, an accident had occurred, a leak. I was still amazed at how quickly Carla had decided to help us, so I decided to press the question. How did you know we were running from the soldiers? She took a deep breath. Yesterday, many military trucks were passing through the village going north. This is unusual, and it made me think of the time 2 months ago when my friends were taken away. My friends and I studied the manuscript together. We were the only ones in this village who had all 8 insights. Then the soldiers came and took my friends. I have not heard from them. As I watched the trucks yesterday, she continued, I knew the soldiers were continuing to hunt copies of the manuscript and that others, like my friends, would need help. I envisioned myself helping those people if I could. Of course, I suspected that it was meaningful that I was having that particular thought at that particular time. So, when you came into my house, I was not surprised. She paused, then asked, Have you experienced this? Yes, I said. Carlos slowed the car. Ahead was a crossroads. I think we should turn to the right here, she said. It will take longer, but it will be safer. As Carla turned the car to the right, Marita slid to the left and had to hold onto the seat to keep from falling over. She giggled. Marjorie was staring appreciatively at the little girl. How old is Marita? Margie asked. Carla looked disturbed, then said gently, Please don't talk about her as if she wasn't there. If she was an adult, how would you have addressed the question? You would have addressed the question to her. Oh, I'm sorry, Marjorie said. I'm 5, Marita said proudly. Have you studied the 8th insight? Carla asked. No, Marjorie said. I've only seen the third insight. I'm at the eighth, I said. Do you have copies? No, Carla said. All the copies were taken away by the soldiers. Does the eighth talk about how to relate to children? Yes, it is about how humans will eventually learn to relate to each other, and talks of many things, such as how to project energy to others and how to avoid addictions to people. There was that warning again. I was about to ask Carla what it meant when Marjorie spoke. Tell us about the eighth insight, she said. The eighth insight, Carla explains, is about using energy in a new way when relating to people in general, but it begins at the beginning with children. How should we view children? I asked. We should view them as they really are, as endpoints in evolution that lead us forward. But in order to learn to evolve, they need our energy on a constant basis unconditionally. The worst thing that can be done to children is to drain their energy while correcting them. This is what creates control dramas in them, as you already know. But these learned manipulations on the child's part can be avoided if the adults give them all the energy they need, no matter what the situation. This is why they should always be included in conversations, especially conversations about them. And you should never take responsibility for more children than you can give attention to. The manuscript says all this, I asked. Yes, she said, and the point about the number of children is highly stressed. I felt confused. Why is the number of children one has important? Oh, that's interesting. I forgot about this part. She glanced at me for an instant as she drove. Because any one adult can only focus on and give attention to one child at a time. If there are too many children for the number of adults, then the adults become overwhelmed and unable to give enough energy. The children begin to compete with each other for the adults' time. Sibling rivalry, I said. Yes, but the manuscript says that this problem is more important than people think. Adults often glamorize the idea of large families and children growing up together, but children should learn the world from adults, not from other children. In too many cultures, children are running in gangs. The manuscript says humans will slowly understand that they should not bring children into the world unless there is at least one adult committed to focus full attention all of the time on each child. But wait a minute, I said. In many situations, both parents must work to survive. This denies them the right to have children. Not necessarily, she replied. The manuscript says humans will learn to extend their families beyond blood ties, so that someone else is able to provide one-on-one attention. All the energy does not have to come from the parents alone. In fact, it is better if it does not, but whoever cares for the children must provide this one-on-one attention. Well, I said, you've done something right. Marita certainly seems mature. Carla frowned and said, don't tell me, tell her. Oh, right. I looked at the child. You act very grown up, Marita. She looked away shyly for a moment, then said, thank you. Carla hugged her warmly. Carla looked at me proudly. For the last 2 years, I've been trying to relate to Marita according to the manuscript's guidelines. Haven't I, Marita? The child smiled and nodded. I have tried to give her energy and to always tell her the truth of every situation in language she can understand. When she asks the questions a young child asks, I treated them very seriously, avoiding the temptations of giving her a fanciful answer which is plainly for the entertainment of adults. I smiled. Do you mean untruths like storks spring babies, that sort of thing? Yes, but these cultural expressions aren't so bad. Children figure out quickly because they stay the same. Worse are the distortions created on the spot by adults just because they want to have a little fun and because they believe the truth is too complicated for a child to comprehend. This is not right. The truth can always be expressed at a child's level of understanding. It just takes some thought. What does the manuscript say about this issue? It says we should always find a way to tell a child the truth. Part of me resisted this idea. I was one who enjoyed kidding around with children. Don't kids usually understand that adults are just playing? I said. All this seems to make them grow up too fast and take some of the fun out of childhood. She looked at me sternly. Marita is full of fun. We chase and tumble and play all the childhood fantasy games. The difference is that when we are fantasizing, she knows it. I nodded. She was right, of course. Marita seems confident, Carla continued, because I was there for her. I gave her one-on-one attention when she needed it, and if I wasn't there, my sister, who lives next door, was there. She always had an adult to answer her questions, and because she had had this sincere attention, she has never felt she had to act out or show off. She always had enough energy, and that made her assume she will continue to have enough, which makes the transition from receiving energy from adults to getting it from the universe, which we already talked about, much easier for her to grasp. I noticed the terrain outside. We were traveling through deep jungle now, and I couldn't see it. And though I couldn't see it, I knew the sun was low in the afternoon sky. Can we get to Iquitos tonight? I asked. No, Carla said, but we can stay at a house I know. Near here? Yes, it is the house of a friend. He works for the Wildlife Service. He works for the government. Some of the Amazon is a protected area. He's the local agent, but influential. His name is Juan Hinton. No, do not worry. He believes in the manuscript and they have never bothered him. By the time we arrived, the sky was completely dark. Around us, the jungle was alive with night sounds, the air muggy. A large, well-lit wood frame house stood at the end of a clearing in the dense foliage. Nearby were two large buildings and several jeeps. Another vehicle was up on blocks, and two men worked around lights underneath. A thin Peruvian dressed in expensive clothing answered Carlo's knock and smiled at her until he noticed Marjorie, Marita, and myself waiting on the steps. His face turned nervous and displeased as he talked to her in Spanish. She said something pleadingly in return, but his mannerism and inflection indicated that he did not want us to stay. Then, through the crack in the door, I noticed a lone female figure standing in the foyer. I moved a little to bring her face into view. It was Julia. As I looked, she turned her head and saw me, then quickly walked forward with a surprised look on her face. She touched the shoulder of the man at the door and said something quietly into his ear. The man nodded, then opened the door with a look of resignation. We all introduced ourselves as Hinton led the way into the den area. Julia looked at me and said, "We meet again." She wore khaki pants with pockets on the legs and a bright red t-shirt. "Yes, we do," I said. A Peruvian servant stopped Hinton, and after talking for a minute, the two walked into another part of the house. Julia sat in a chair by a coffee table and motioned for the rest of us to sit on a couch across from her. Marjorie appeared panicked. She looked at me intensely. Carla also seemed to be aware of Marjorie's distress. She walked over and took her by the hand. "Let's get some hot tea," she suggested. As they walked away, Marjorie glanced back at me. I smiled and watched them until they turned the corner into the kitchen. Then I turned to face Julia. "So what do you think it means?" she asked. "What does what mean?" I replied, still distracted. "That we've run into each other again." "Oh, I don't know." "So how did you wind up with Carla and where are you going?" "She saved us. Marjorie and I have been detained by Peruvian troops. When we escaped, she happened to be there to help us." Julia looked intense. "Tell me what occurred." I leaned back and told her the whole story, beginning at the point at which I had taken Father Carl's truck, and then all about the capture and our eventual escape. "And Carla agreed to take you to Iquitos?" "Yes." "Why do you want to go there?" "That's where Will told Father Carl he was going. Will apparently has a lead about the ninth insight. Also, Sebastian is there for some reason." Julia nodded. "Yes, Sebastian has a mission near there. It's where he made his reputation, converting the Indians." "What about you?" I asked. "What are you doing here?" Julia told me that she too wanted to find the ninth insight, but that she had no leads. She had come to this house after thinking repeatedly of her old friend Hinton. I was hardly listening. Marjorie and Carla had walked out of the kitchen and were standing in the hall talking, cups of tea in their hands. Marjorie caught my eye but said nothing. "Has she read much of the manuscript?" Julia asked, nodding toward Marjorie. "Just the third insight," I said. "We can probably get her out of Peru if that's what she wants." I turned and looked at her. "How?" "Orlando is leaving tomorrow for Brazil. We have some friends at the American embassy there. He can get her back to the United States." We have helped other Americans this way. I looked at her and nodded attentively. I realized I was having mixed feelings about what she had said. Part of me knew that leaving would be best for Marjorie. Another part wanted her to stay, to remain with me. I felt changed, energized when she was around. I think I need to talk with her, I finally said. Of course, Julia replied. We can talk later. I got up and walked towards her. Carla was heading back toward the kitchen. Marjorie stepped around the corner of the hall out of sight. When I walked up, she was leaning back against the wall. I pulled Marjorie into my arms. My body pulsated. Feel that energy? I asked, whispering into her ear. It's incredible, she said. What does it mean? I don't know. We have some kind of connection. I glanced around. No one can see us. We kissed passionately. When I pulled back to look at her face, she looked different, stronger somehow. And I thought back to the day we had met at Vicente and to the conversation in the restaurant in Kula. I couldn't believe the amount of energy I felt in her presence when she touched me. She held me tightly. Since the day at Vicente, she said, I've wanted to be with you. I didn't know what to think about it then, but the energy is wonderful. I've never experienced anything like this. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Carla walking out smiling. She told us that dinner was ready, so we made our way into the dining room and found a huge buffet of fresh fruits and vegetables and breads. Everyone served their plates and sat around a large table. After Marita sang a blessing song, we spent an hour and a half eating and talking casually. Hinton had lost his nervousness, and he set a light-hearted mood which helped to ease the tension of our escape. Marjorie was talking freely and laughing. Sitting beside her filled me with warm love. After dinner, Hinton took us back into the den where a custard dessert was served with a sweet liqueur. Marjorie and I sat on the couch and fell into a long conversation about our pasts and significant life experiences. We seemed to grow closer and closer. The only difficulty we discovered was that she lived on the West Coast and I resided in the South. Later, Marjorie dismissed the problem and laughed heartily. I can't wait until we get back to the United States, she said. We'll have so much fun traveling back and forth. I sat back and gave her a serious look. Julia said she could arrange a way for you to go home now. You mean both of us, don't you? She replied. No, I can't go. Why? She asked. I can't leave without you. But I can't stand to stay here any longer either. I'll go crazy. You'll have to go on ahead. I'll be able to leave soon. No, she said loudly. I can't stand that. Carla, who was walking back to the den from putting Marita in bed, glanced towards us, then looked quickly away. Hinton and Julia were still talking, seemingly oblivious to Marjorie's outburst. Please, Marjorie said, let's just go home. I looked away. Okay, fine. Stay. She stood and walked briskly towards the bedroom area. My gut wrenched as I watched Marjorie walk away. The energy I had gained with her collapsed, and I suddenly felt weak and confused. I tried to shake it off. After all, I told myself, I had known her that long. On the other hand, I thought maybe she was correct. Maybe I should just go home. What difference could I make here anyway? Back at home, I could perhaps marshal some support for the manuscript and stay alive as well. I stood up and started to follow her down the hall, but for some reason, I sat back down. I couldn't decide what to do. May I join you for a minute? Carla was suddenly asking. I hadn't noticed that she was standing beside the sofa. Sure, I said. She sat down and looked at me with regret. I couldn't help overhearing what was going on, she said. And I thought that before you made your decision, you might want to hear what the Eighth Insight says about addictions to people. Yes, please. I want to know what that means. When one first learns to be clear and to engage one's evolution, any of us can be stopped suddenly by an addiction to another person. You're speaking of Marjorie and me, aren't you? Let me explain the process, she said, and you judge for yourself. Okay. First, let me say that I had a very hard time with this part of the insight. I don't think I would have ever understood if I had not met Professor Renaud. Renaud? I exclaimed. I know him. We met when I was learning the fourth insight. Well, she said, We met when we both had reached the eighth insight. He stayed at my house for several days. I nodded in amazement. He said that the idea of an addiction, as used in the manuscript, explains why power struggles arise in romantic relationships. We've always wondered what causes the bliss and euphoria of love to end, to suddenly turn into conflict, and now we know. It's a result of the flow of energy between the individuals involved. When love first happens, the two individuals are giving each other energy unconsciously, and both people feel buoyant and elated. That's the incredible high we all call being in love. Unfortunately, once they expect this feeling to come from the other person, they cut themselves off from the energy in the universe and begin to rely even more on the energy from each other. Only now, there doesn't seem to be enough. And so they stop giving each other energy and fall back into their dramas in an attempt to control each other and force the other's energy their way. At this point, the relationship degenerates into the usual power struggle. She hesitated for a moment, as if checking whether understood, then added, Renault told me that our susceptibility to this kind of addiction can be described in psychology, if that will help you understand. These are all Scorpio themes, by the way. I nodded again for her to continue. Renault said the problem starts in our early family. Because of the energy competition there, none of us were able to complete an important psychological process. We weren't able to integrate our opposite sexual side. Our what? In my case, she continued, I wasn't able to integrate my male side. In your case, you weren't able to integrate your female side. The reason we can become addicted to someone of the opposite sex is that we've yet to access this opposite sex energy in ourselves. You see, the mystical energy that we can tap as an inner source is both male and female. We can eventually open up to it, but when we first begin to evolve, we have to be careful. The integration process takes some time. If we connect prematurely with a human source for our female or male energy, we block the universal supply. I told her I didn't understand. Think of how this integration is supposed to work in an ideal family, she explained. And then perhaps you can see what I mean. In any family, the child must first receive energy from the adults in his life. Usually, identifying with and integrating the energy of the same sex parent is accomplished easily, but receiving energy from the other parent can be more difficult because of the differences in the sexes. Let us use a female child, for example. All the little girl knows as she first attempts to integrate her male side is that she is extremely attracted to her father. She wants him around and close to her all the time. The manuscript explains that what she really wants is male energy, because this male energy complements her female side. From this male energy, she receives a sense of completion and euphoria. But she mistakenly thinks that the only way to have this energy is by sexually possessing her father and keeping him close physically. Interestingly, because she intuits that this energy is really supposed to be her own and that she should be able to command this energy at will, she wants to direct the father as if she were that part of herself, as if he were that part of herself, sorry. She thinks that he is magical and perfect and able to supply her every whim. In a less than ideal family, this sets up a power conflict between the little girl and her dad. Dramas are formed as she learns to posture herself in order to manipulate him into giving her the energy she desires. But in an ideal family, the father would remain uncompetitive. He would continue to relate honestly and have enough energy so as to supply her unconditionally, even though he can't do everything she asks. The important thing to know here in our ideal example is that the father would remain open and communicative. She thinks he is ideal and magical, but if he honestly explains who he is and what he's doing and why, then the little girl can integrate his particular style and abilities and proceed past an unrealistic view of her father. In the end, she will see him as just a particular human being, a human being with his own talents and faults. Once this true emulation takes place, then the child makes an easy transition from receiving her opposite sex energy from her father to receiving it as part of an overall energy existing in the universe at large. The problem, she went on, is that most parents, up to now, have been competing with their own children for energy, and that has affected all of us. Because this competition was taking place, none of us have quite resolved this opposite sex issue. We're all stuck at the stage where we are still looking for our opposite sex energy outside of ourselves in the person of a male or female we can think of as ideal and magical and can possess sexually. See the problem? Yes, I said, I think I do. In terms of our ability to evolve consciously, she continued, we are faced with a critical situation. As I said before, according to the eighth insight, when we first begin to evolve, we automatically begin to receive our opposite sex energy. It comes in naturally from the energy in the universe. But we must be careful. Because if another person comes along who offers this energy directly, we can cut ourselves off from the true source and regress. She chuckled to herself. What are you laughing at? I asked. Reno once made this analogy, she said. He said that until we learn how to avoid this situation, we're walking around like a circle half complete. You know, you look like the letter C. We are very susceptible to a person of the opposite sex, some other circle half complete, coming up and joining with us, completing the circle that way, and giving us a burst of euphoria and energy that feels like the wholeness that a full connection with the universe produces. In reality, we've only joined up with another person who is looking for their other half on the outside, too. Renault said that this is a classical codependent relationship and then it has built in problems that begin to arise immediately. She hesitated as though expecting me to say something, but I only nodded. You see, the problem with this completed person, this O or zero, that both people think they have reached, is that they have taken two people to make this one whole person, one supplying the female energy and one supplying the male. This one whole person consequently has two heads or two egos. Both people want to run this whole person that they have created, and so, just as in childhood, both people want to command the other as if the other were themselves. This kind of illusion of completeness always breaks down into a power struggle. In the end, each person must take the other for granted and even invalidate them so that they can lead this whole self in the direction they want to go. But of course, that doesn't work, at least not anymore. Perhaps in the past, one of the partners was willing to submit themselves to the other, usually the woman, sometimes the man, but we are waking up now. No one wants to be subservient to anyone else any longer. I thought of what the first insight had conveyed about power struggles within intimate relationships, and of the woman's outburst at the restaurant with Charlene. So much for romance, I said. Oh, we can still have romance, Carla replied, but first we have to complete the circle on our own. We have to stabilize our channel with the universe. That takes time. But afterward, we are never susceptible to this problem again, and we can have what the manuscript calls a higher relationship. When we connect romantically with another whole person after that, we create a super person. But it never pulls from us. It never pulls us from the path, of our individual evolution. Which is what you think Marjorie and I are doing to each other now, isn't it? Pulling ourselves off our paths? Yes. So how do we avoid these encounters? I asked. By resisting the love at first sight feeling for a while, by learning to have platonic relationships with members of the opposite sex. But remember the process. You must have these relationships only with people who will reveal themselves totally, telling you how and why they are doing what they are doing. Just as this would have happened with the opposite sex parent during an ideal childhood. But understanding who these opposite sex friends really are on the inside, one breaks past one's own fantasy projection about that gender, and that releases us to connect again with the universe. Remember also, she continued, that this is not easy, especially if one has to break away from a current codependent relationship. It is a real pulling apart of energy. It hurts, but it must be done. Codependence is not some new malady for us to have. We're all codependent and we're all growing out of it now. The idea is to begin to experience that sense of well-being and euphoria experienced in the first moment of a codependent relationship when you are alone. You get to have him or her on the inside. After that, you evolve forward and can find that specific romantic relationship that really fits you. She paused. And who knows, if both you and Marjorie evolve further, perhaps you will find that you truly belong with each other. But understand, your relationship with her has no way of working now. Our conversation was interrupted as Hinton walked over and explained that he was retiring for the night and that our rooms had been prepared. We both expressed our appreciation for his hospitality and he walked away. Carla said, I think I'm going to bed also. We'll talk later. I nodded and watched her as she left. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Julia. I'm going to my room, she said. Do you know where yours is? I can show you. Please, I said, then asked, where is Marjorie's room? She smiled and walked down the hall and stopped in front of a particular door. Nowhere near yours, she said. Mr. Hinton is a very conservative man. I smiled back and bid her good night, then entered my room and held my stomach until I went to sleep. And I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop there.
Woohoo! Thank you.
This chapter is savage.
Yeah, it is.
Definitely good stuff, Kelly. Thanks.
Oh, yeah, and happy birthday.
Thank
Happy birthday to you.
You made it.
I don't live in a zoo. I did.
Boy, I thought you said you lived in Canada.
Well, yeah, you're right. Okay, that is a zoo. I take that back.
A very polite one, though.
Yeah. Oh, that comparison is too real. Oof.
The zoo, Canadian zoo. Ope, 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 ope.
Just missing the bars. But yeah.
Oh no, it's
that
one of
chap-
these habitat type zoos.
Oh. It's a nice open air style.
Yeah, yeah, like the one in Portland. It's a beautiful zoo in Portland.
I've never been to Portland.
You been to the Portland Zoo, Jim? It's almost impossible that he hasn't.
Nope. Yeah, man, that chapter touched on a lot. Even some themes that are coming up now politically, so that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's a trip. How well they take the fictional story and weave it together with what I would call Jungian insights. You know, like it's a trip.
Right? But potent.
And I'm sure for the time that it was published, very controversial too for the women to be getting it on. Like, hey, whoa, hold on now, Mr. So and so is a very conservative man.
Right.
You
Nowhere
experimental
near
lesbians can't
yours.
be caught around here. Yeah, no one near yours.
What year was that read?
This was released 1993.
Okay.
Yeah, so not insanely over the top, but definitely enough for young Christian girls getting caught with this book and they're hidden underneath their bed to be in big, big trouble.
Oh, definitely. Even talks down the church. Talking about energy and woo woo stuff.
Yeah.
Has the word prophecy in it. How dare you?
Now that would be a good series of questions to put out on the web, like give some kind of incentivized little prize or gift or something for people who want to talk about how Celestine prophecy changed their life and especially got them in trouble. Like we want to hear about how it changed your life, but if you got in trouble, you know, then you get free bingo prizes for moving spiders or something.
That'd be fascinating. It has not gotten me in trouble. In fact, my mom said that she thought she read it once. And my mom's like very Christian. And yet at the same time acknowledges the woo. It's crazy.
No, that's all. I mean, all the real Christians I know are that way.
Right.
You know, I know stubborn old right-wing grumpy Christian men who will stand and almost cry and apologize to a tree for having to cut it down. And it's like, well, wait, hold on a minute.
Aw.
Yeah, wait a minute here. Like, you're kind of really acting like a pagan right now. You know that, right?
Is that a T-ball that you're carving on?
Me?
Yeah.
No, no. Yeah, yes, it is a T-ball. I press the clay right through it and get weird texture.
I love it. Martin, I'm shocked you're still awake.
She's not sleepy tonight.
Oh.
Nice.
Yeah, I like that masculine feminine dynamic that she was writing about there. It's a
Yeah,
female
and-
author, is that right?
No, it's his name's James Redfield.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. That's funny. I was
Yeah.
assuming it was a woman author the whole time.
Haha, psych. Yeah, interesting, hey. But yeah, don't you find that true though? Like it's so easy to get pulled off your path, especially if like you forget, oh hey, this other person isn't supposed to be the one making me happy. I'm supposed to make myself happy.
Yeah,
Right.
that's how I knew I was finally getting well after I'd gone through 7 years of insane hell. And I finally came back, and then anytime I found myself being attracted to a similar female as the one that I had been with, it was like, oh, wait, you sure that's what you want to do? You want to go back to like trying to control some woman like this while she first enjoys it and then hates it, and then you guys can like go back and forth like that forever? Is that what you want to do? Like, no, it's not what I want to do. Like, right. So you're not actually attracted to her then. You just
Mhm.
think you are, you know? It's like, oh crap, you're right. All right.
Oh man, it's just playing up the same goddamn dynamic again.
Yeah, I don't want to vie for the cross. That's what me and my ex used to call the like fighting so redundantly that you're just saying the same lines over and over again. We used to call it vying for the cross. Like,
Wow.
no, I'm on the cross tonight. I'm being crucified, not you. You know, you get yourself
Kind
hammered up there. You can get both feet hammered in pretty good, and one hand you can get kind of hammered in, and then you have that free hand, and you're like, help me. It's like, no, I'm pulling you down. It's my turn. You
kind
can't
of
crucify
amazing.
yourself all the way.
Kind of amazing you were able to figure that out though, like with her at the same time. That's funny.
Oh yeah, it was deep over the top. I mean, we excelled in toxicity far above and beyond most people's wildest imaginations, and I mean that. And I'm not bragging. Oh boy. Yeah, if anyone's out there listening to this and you already know you're in like a relationship it's really not going good, and it's already been going on for a long time, and you know, it's okay to let go and get out.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to continue and find out how bad it can get, because it's far worse than you could ever fucking possibly imagine.
What I learned is that the pattern always progresses until
Exactly.
one of the two breaks it. It never regresses, it always progresses.
That's
Worse.
right. Exactly.
Always.
It does. Yeah. There's no way for it to go even just go sideways. It cannot.
Yeah.
It's gonna
Until
go down.
until both parties take accountability and make changes,
That's it.
which sometimes, yeah.
And just like in the book, it says that like
Yeah.
if you get away from each other, you might be able to come back together and work it out. But really, you can't even. Like, it's almost impossible. I've never seen anyone successfully work out a situation like that, and remain in the relationship together without at least some kind of separation. To
Mm-hmm.
especially if core trust is damaged, it's like it's not going to happen. You can't really restore trust very easily.
Mm-mm. Nope. But
It's unfortunate, but it's true.
I like that in the first part of this chapter they do offer a couple solutions, right? They need to go your own way, at least temporarily,
That's it.
and to make friends with people of the opposite sex and not get sucked into the love at first sight
Yeah.
feeling. Just develop
Right. Learn
platonic
how to have
friendships.
platonic relationships with people.
That's why I love you guys.
No, this is a great group. It's so amazingly good how we have real friendships, and as far as I can tell, there's no bullshit. That doesn't mean some of us aren't sneaking around and doing stuff. Who knows? But in general, it seems really genuine and good. And I think it's beautiful and amazing.
It's pretty cool. It's an honor.
It is an honor. I agree.
And with
We're
that,
kicking ass and taking names out here.
right? And with that, I'm going to bed. Good night.
Happy birthday.
Alright. Yeah, happy birthday. Have a
Guys.
good night.
I appreciate you. Have a good night.
Birthday.
Too. That was a dramatic exit. Now what? How many do we have? Oh, we've got a nice group remaining here. Oh wait, I forget there's double cameras. Maybe is it just 3 of us? No, it says 7. Yeah, so that means 2, 4, 6. Not that it matters, I guess.
I should probably get some sleep too, guys.
Yeah, it's the latest where you are.
Yeah, I don't
Appreciate
even
you
know.
reading, man.
Thanks. Yeah, it was fun. Next week, new book, new characters.
Oh yeah, because that's yeah, that's an interesting book you're reading us.
Yeah. There's some definite insights into Rosicrucian ways.
Yeah, and that's probably the end of the story for the young girl, huh?
I don't know. We'll see.
That's why I love you, Martin. Like, you're not tricking me into giving any foreshadowing.
I'm not gonna divulge.
I assumed you wouldn't, but it doesn't hurt to test and see where we get.
Well,
I don't get
yeah.
that. I don't get that vibe off of you that you're someone I can work over tricky language for information. I try to avoid doing that anyway, but still, that's some people you can tell like, oh, I might be able to get some info from this person if I really needed to, but I definitely do not get that vibe from you, Martin.
Just send back that 50-cent piece, then I'll tell you anything you want to know.
Now that's perfect. That to me, that's beautifully representative of how real life works. Like, this is how redundant and stupid we need to make everything if you really want to go this route, where we
Right.
where we're bargaining and manipulating each other. Like, okay, well, I sent you a gift, so send it back. We'll start there, and then,
Right.
and then we'll talk. Then we can talk about what's next. Like, oh God.
No, you
Never
keep
mind.
that.
I'll just use my faith in God. Forget it. Forget it then.
Okay, forget it.
That's funny. Perfect.
Yep. And that's it for me. Good night.
Good night, bro. Talk to you soon.
Yeah. See you guys.
Well, how are you guys doing?
Don't have a full tray like I would usually like, but if we want to call this thing, it's okay. I understand if it's
Might
necessary.
call it. Say goodnight to our friends online. Good night, friends online.